Chapter 1299. Fog City, outside the city, in Sir Puskins Manor. Inside the night organization, in front of a huge round table, people were sitting around it. They were all the people in charge of the night organization. At this moment, in front of them, there was a similar box. This place was heavily guarded, because outside the round table conference room, except for Lancelot who had been kidnapped, all the current 12 round tables were guarding here. In addition, there were nearly 30 Grand Knights and hundreds of Elite Knights. "Let's begin," Sir Puskins said softly, and first opened the box in front of him. He took out a green gem the size of a pebble. At the same time, the people in charge of the night organization also took out the same thing from the box in front of them almost at the same time. After that, Sir Puskins unscrewed the carving on his cane and then inserted it into a small indentation on the table in front of him and turned it. The sound of gears turning was heard, and the floor in the center of the round table opened at this moment. A king statue holding a sword slowly rose from the floor. The stone sword held by the statue had circular indentations on the blade, which corresponded to the gem held by each person in charge. When the gems seemed to be attracted by something, they automatically flew out from their hands and inserted themselves into the indentations of the stone sword. Everyone held their breath and carefully watched this scene. Although I have always known of its existence, I have never really seen it since I took over. I didn't expect that I would be able to see it in my lifetime. The one who spoke was an old man who was much older than Sir Puskins. His eyes were blurred, and he didn't blink, staring at every change on the statue. Crack! Suddenly, a light sound startled everyone. They saw that the king's statue, starting from the head, had split open and scattered in all directions. Like the blooming of flower petals, what was revealed in the end was a small stone. And in the middle of that stone was a simple stone cup. This is the legendary Holy Grail. The crowd, who had never thought that the Holy Grail would look like this, suddenly felt an indescribable sense of disappointment. Perhaps in their imagination, the Holy Grail should be more precious. Perhaps it didn't need to be too gorgeous. At the very least, it should make people feel that it was extraordinary at first glance. However, this silence only lasted for a few seconds. After a few seconds, the Holy Grail on the stone platform suddenly trembled. A large number of cracks even appeared on its body. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. After an intense tremor, it completely shattered. A dazzling golden light filled every corner of the room in an instant, causing them to be unable to open their eyes. After their vision had adjusted, they once again looked at the Holy Grail in bewilderment. After that, they could no longer conceal the excitement in their hearts. The Holy Grail in front of them was the real deal. It was as if there was boundless magic. Even if one looked at it, their souls seemed to be drawn. Before their eyes, they could not help but see the scene of the kingdom of heaven. Peace, happiness, contentment. The feeling of happiness that a human should bring filled their hearts in an instant. A strange yet infatuated smile of contentment involuntarily surfaced on their faces. Cluck, cluck. A knocking sound suddenly rang out at this time. This time, everyone suddenly quivered and woke up one after another. They saw that this was the sound of Sir Hopkins knocking on the table with his cane. "Everyone, please keep quiet," Sir Hopkins slowly said, as if he didn't see the crowd's loss of composure. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The grape cup of the Last Supper. Legend has it that it even once contained the blood of the Holy Son. A magical cup that can fulfill any wish. The old man muttered to himself, "Everyone, this isn't the Holy Grail in the Bible, but something created by that sinful place 100 years ago. It only has the name of Holy Grail, but it's definitely not a holy object." An old woman frowned at this time. It's written very clearly in the literature that a sacrifice is required to activate it. Speaking of the sacrifice, the willpower of the other person in charge of the night mechanism weakened a little. At this time, the person who was still infatuated with the cup on the stone platform seemed to have woken up from a dream, and cold sweat broke out all over his body. "So, Hopkins, the Holy Grail has been taken out. What are you going to do with the most important part, the sacrifice?" Facing everyone's gazes, Sir Hopkins took a deep breath and slowly said, "It needs to devour souls to activate. Of course, it's impossible to devour the souls of living people. So this time I'm going to use something else. In fact, it's best to use prisoners on death row as sacrifices, but unfortunately, the death penalty has been abolished now. Someone suggested, maybe we could try to use those super criminals. Anyway, our relationship with the Magician Association is a little stiff now, so we don't need to hand over those wanted criminals to them." Sir Hopkins shook his head. After those criminals were captured, the Magician Association has been simultaneously notified. If we don't take them out now, it'll arouse their suspicion. Even if it's because of the country, we were once allies 100 years ago, so there's no need to really make our relationship cold. Then what are you going to do? What other good sacrifices do you have? Are you going to use the heroic souls of the Heroic Soul Palace? Sir Hopkins waved his hand and calmed everyone down. Maybe it's fate. Just before the crisis of the myth of Doomsday was launched, the night mechanism of the Fog City just happened to destroy a criminal group of orcs smuggling. Currently, this group of orcs is here. Orcs? Orcs? Someone muttered. Since they were captured and sold as orc slaves, I think those slave traders wouldn't dare to capture a few fierce orcs protecting their clansmen. It's also possible. Someone was tempted. Then that's it. I won't see them. This person was even more direct. All right, Hopkins, even if you've chosen the sacrificial offering, you can't do it openly. The old man muttered, especially not in front of the 12 knights. This will shake their knightly beliefs. Don't worry, I've already taken care of it. Sir Hopkins was expressionless, but he knocked on the table with his cane again. At this moment, the wall on one side of the round table conference room slowly moved aside, and a knight with a cold face and body stained with blood slowly walked in with a long sword dripping with blood in his hand. The strong smell of blood instantly made everyone frown, and the moment they looked at the knight with cold eyes, they couldn't help but feel a chill. "This is Grand Knight Simpton," Sir Hopkins said calmly. "I've already asked him to take care of it in advance. He's holding the magic sword, Hegni, in his hand. The souls of those orcs have already been stored in this magic sword." "Simpton? Is that him? That kid?" The people in charge all started to reevaluate this man with a gloomy face, and some information about Simpton began to appear in their minds. Many years ago, there was a rioting orc. The ferocity of this orc gave the Knight organization and even the entire Magician Association a headache. In the end, this orc was captured and killed. However, when the troops at that time found the base of this orc, they also saved many innocent humans. Most of them were women. What shocked the troops at that time was that these women were all raped by this orc and gave birth to children. These children were all used for all kinds of experiments. Even after they were saved, these children were basically broken. It seemed like there was only one conscious child left. Later on, this child was raised by the Knight organization and eventually became a Grand Knight. Grand Knight Simpton slightly lowered his head as if he didn't see the gazes of those people in charge. Hopkins also ignored those gazes and slowly said, "Okay, Grand Knight Simpton, I'll give you the glory of activating the Holy Grail. Are you ready?" "Yes, my lord." Grand Knight Simpton raised his sword and saluted. Then, he slowly walked to the table where the Holy Grail was placed. He placed the tip of his demon sword on top of the Holy Grail. Blood began to pour out of the blade and drip into the Holy Grail. The power of the Holy Grail will increase according to the number of sacrifices. Sir Hopkins said with a serious expression, "There are 43 orc souls here. It's impossible for the Holy Grail to directly solve this crisis." "What do you plan to do, Hopkins?" "The root of this chaos is the Doomsday Myth organization." Hopkins said directly, "We need all the information about this organization, including the name list of their members and their location. Only by eliminating them from the root can we prevent something like this from happening in the future." Drops of blood dripped down from the demon sword. When the cup was almost half full, the Holy Grail once again emitted a bright light. At the same time, an ancient parchment scroll slowly appeared in front of Sir Hopkins. Paid to the madam, $5 million. Of course, a prompt like this wouldn't appear. What appeared was just a prompt in a format similar to this. The general content was, "You have received a sum of normal souls. Quantity, 43. In Boss Luo's mind, he once again heard the lowly voice of the altar that he imagined. Why do I suddenly feel like I found $100 in the pocket of someone's clothes that I haven't worn in a long time? Master." Miss Maid didn't understand why her master suddenly said this. She slightly tilted her head, and her hair fell down. "Ah, don't move. This position is not bad." Boss Luo, who had written a maxim for himself, decided to do a lot of things. At the same time, he didn't want to be trapped in endless transactions. Therefore, he restrained himself from the time-wasting activity of observation all the time. Inside the room, Miss Maid and her master were starting an activity called photography. After all, it was a long night. Without a mobile phone or a clock in the dark stone room, the only thing that could judge the time was probably the human body's perception. The queen felt a little tired. It should be past her usual sleeping time. Lancelot didn't lie down. When the queen's palm was released from her eyes, she had recovered a little. She used the fastest time to eat the food sent by Caesar to replenish her strength. She seemed to be a different person, but she seemed to be the same as before. The queen smiled and looked at Lancelot's actions at this time. "Is this useful?" The queen couldn't help but ask curiously. Lancelot was holding the shackles on her hands and began to grind on the floor of the stone room. A lot of stone powder had been ground out. Lancelot said seriously, "This kind of shackles was developed by the Magicians' Association. It is specially used to imprison extraordinary power. It is made of a special alchemy mineral called Hamu stone, but it has basically been eliminated now. In fact, there are still many of these tools left in the knight's mechanism. Although it is very convenient to imprison extraordinary power, it is not strong. There was once a prisoner who broke the chain in this way." "I see." The queen nodded with relief. "In your opinion, how long will it take to break it?" Lancelot shook her head. "It's hard to say." At that time, the prisoner seemed to have spent more than half a month to break it. "However, it's better to have a way than not. We can't keep waiting for rescue. Your Majesty, can you please pay attention to the outside? If someone is coming in, I want to stop this." "All right, child. I'll help you keep an eye on it. Trust me, I can do it." The queen was still smiling happily. However, more than half a month. The queen couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. She didn't tell Lancelot that Caesar would execute her before sunrise. The queen didn't intend to deny Lancelot's efforts at this time. Instead, she slowly walked to the door and pretended to listen carefully to the sound outside. "Oh, it seems that someone is really coming." The queen quickly turned around at this time. Lancelot quickly lay on the ground, covering the stone powder that was ground out. At the same time, she retracted the chain and turned her body sideways. When the door opened, the queen took a few steps back and blocked in front of Lancelot. "What are you doing?" The people who came in were Judas and Catherine. Catherine looked at the queen suspiciously at this time. Her Majesty was neither salty nor indifferent at this time, with the anger and sarcasm of an imprisoned person. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't you know that this kind of cold place can easily make me sick? If I don't stand up and move around, it is very likely that I will be cold. I ask you to give me a better treatment." Judas frowned. Obviously, he hated this so-called aristocratic behavior. "Then I hope you have enough exercise. Otherwise, it will be colder when it is late at night." "You rude people." Her Majesty immediately scolded angrily. Catherine just sneered but did not care. Instead, she looked at Lancelot on the ground. "This girl, is she still not awake? What did you do to her?" Her Majesty continued to scold angrily. "Let me see if she is dead or not." Catherine sneered and was about to walk past the queen. Unexpectedly, Her Majesty frowned at this time and stopped her, continuing to scold angrily. "You have already made her like this. Do you still want to hurt her? As the Queen of Great Britain, I ask you to stop this rude behavior immediately." "Bad old woman." Catherine snorted lightly. "Forget it," Judas said indifferently. "Caesar just asked us to take a look. There is no need to argue with her. How about this, Your Majesty? If you feel cold, I will send you a blanket later. I also asked for a pot of hot tea, and it is best to bring more fresh milk. I need fresh milk to sleep peacefully. Do you think this is a hotel? Damn old woman. Do you still not know your situation? Women always make things difficult for other women. Judas shook his head, reached out, and pulled Catherine out. Well, there's no fresh milk, but I can send you some hot water. If there is nothing else, just stay here. After the door was closed, Her Majesty slowly breathed a sigh of relief. She leaned against the door and listened for a while, then said, Well, this should have gone far. Child, my right, I can do it well. Only then did Lancelot sit up and gratefully look at Her Majesty the Queen, who stood in front of him. Can you hear anything? Her Majesty suddenly frowned at this time. Lancelot was startled and listened attentively. She seemed to hear some sound coming from outside. The air seemed to be trembling slightly. A huge fighter plane was slowly descending from the night sky at this time. Chapter 1300. Obviously, even the Queen and Lancelot, who were in the stone room, could hear the sound. It was impossible for the members of the myth of Doomsday not to be alerted. What happened? Catherine and Judas were the last to come out. When they arrived, Caesar and Tipu were already standing outside. A huge shadow appeared in the sky. The flickering lights on it finally allowed them to vaguely see its appearance. This is... Judas immediately frowned. At this time, a rapid beast cry was heard. It was the Queen's pet, who was now crying out in fear at the huge monster in the sky. It seems that the other party is not incompetent. Did they find it? Judas could not help but feel a little worried. It was reasonable to say that this place should be shielded from all magic sensing means. They were even confident that they could safely wait for the arrival of the next day's sunrise. But in fact, not to mention the sunrise now, there was still more than an hour to midnight, and it was still within today's time. Leader? Tipu at this time hurriedly looked at Caesar at this time. Caesar said indifferently, You guys leave with the Queen, leave this place to me. Let's meet at the agreed place. But Catherine grabbed Caesar's arm with one hand. He just looked at her with a smile and took out the harmonica from his chest and handed it to Catherine and said softly, Help me keep it safe. As long as it is here, I will definitely come back. Catherine was silent for a while and finally nodded. She knew very well the meaning of this harmonica to Caesar. This was a relic left by his deceased wife, and she had been taking it with her all the time. She cherished it very much. If I don't see you before dawn, I'll drop it. You remember this. Catherine suddenly tiptoed and bit Caesar's shoulder hard, and then rushed into the house without looking back. You be careful, Judas quickly said. Leader, we will wait for you. Tipu also hugged Caesar. They all left. Caesar took a deep breath. He looked at the faintly discernible holy seal on the back of his hand, and then looked up at the huge black shadow in the sky. The holy seal is not moving. Isn't it a night mechanism? Above the night sky, inside the huge fighter jet, a row of more than 20 young men and women wearing tight blue combat suits were sitting in 4 rows. On the screen, the Prime Minister's appearance was reflected in their sight. He encouraged all the young men and women there with a high-spirited tone. In front of you are the extremely dangerous inhumans who have destroyed the safety of our country. But I believe that years of hard work and sweat are enough to make you the most elite warriors. Each and every one of you is the culmination of our nation's painstaking efforts. Today, you will become the sword that saves the world. Warriors of the warriors of the warriors' warriors of the Fun Warriors Legion in your stage. They raised their heads and said in unison, We are the sword of salvation. We are the warriors of the Warriors Legion. As they spoke, their seats began to move. Suddenly, at the same time, strange metal parts began to assemble on their bodies from the back of their chairs. Metal parts like kinetic exoskeleton armor were assembled on their legs, arms, waist, and other places, and finally even their heads. They were wearing a light helmet. All of this was completed in less than 10 seconds. Finally, the deck of their seats opened up. Outside was the night sky outside of the battlefield. They began to slide down from here. One by one, The warriors of the warriors of the warriors legion fell into the sky, and at this time, the armor on their backs suddenly opened up, turning into strange, shell-like thrusters on both sides. They achieved the freedom of individual movement in the sky. At the same time, in the huge control room of the headquarters, the faces of these warriors appeared on the screen at the same time, along with their personal information. Power value, HP value. It's finally starting. The Prime Minister silently looked at the screen, but at this time, he calmed down. In the distance, on a small hill, two men wearing jackets, with grass rings on their heads, and a huge turf covering their bodies, were observing the night sky with night vision goggles. One of them even had a cigarette in his mouth. Finally, the secret weapon of the British government has appeared. The man with the cigarette in his mouth was slightly excited at this time. He spoke in authentic Hua language. Leader, we've been lurking for a few years, and finally we have some results. The companion beside him couldn't hide his excitement at this time. I haven't been back for a few years, and I don't know what the situation in the Bureau is like. Okay, stop talking nonsense. We must record these things and send them back as soon as possible. This thing seems to be some kind of high-tech product. I believe that Dr. Zhao of the First Research Institute will be so excited that he won't be able to sleep. Roger. In the courtyard in front of the old monastery, Caesar stood alone with his hands behind his back, looking at the figures slowly descending from the night sky with indifferent eyes. There was only one priest in this monastery, and the priest had even retired and was currently trapped in a room in the monastery. No one would have thought that Her Majesty the Queen of Great Britain would be locked in this inconspicuous monastery on the outskirts of Fog City. The number was 23. Caesar silently counted these guys in strange armor. They were all very young, and they were holding huge guns in their hands. At this time, two of them slowly landed on the ground. The shell-shaped armor wings on their backs slowly folded, and at the same time, they pointed the guns in their hands at Caesar, making an aiming gesture, and said in a deep voice, "Don't move." Caesar glanced at them indifferently and stretched out his hand from behind. But at this time, one of the two young men on the ground suddenly pulled the trigger of the weapon in his hand. A ray of light flew past Caesar's cheek at the speed of light, and at the same time, a loud noise came from behind Caesar. Caesar looked back and saw that the wall of the monastery had melted, leaving a big hole with a diameter of nearly 1 meter. The edge of the damaged wall was in a state of melting, and the high temperature even seemed to distort the space. I've already said, don't move. The young man who fired the gun at this time said sternly, "Please put down your weapons and surrender. You have been surrounded." I said, "Don't move." Caesar looked at these guys and slowly took out a carton of cigarettes from his clothes. Under everyone's gaze, he lit it as if there was no one around, and took a puff. When the smoke came out, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Although I'm not very clear about your background, it seems like this is your first battle." His voice not only sounded in the ears of the 23 members of the F at the same time, but also in the control room of the F headquarters. The Prime Minister, who had been observing, could not help but frown. "If I were you, I wouldn't appear with such great fanfare. If your mission is to save people," Caesar said casually. "So, are you trying to show something, and you're in a hurry to show it? Take him down. Don't talk nonsense with him. Attack the monastery. Annihilate the enemy." In the sky, the leading young man gave the order in a deep voice. Sure enough, the goal is not to save the hostages. Caesar shook his head and then stomped his foot. In the next moment, he appeared in front of one of the two soldiers on the ground and threw a punch, but the soldier reacted quickly and raised one of his arms. Caesar's fist hit the armor on the soldier's arm, but a small light shield spread out from the armor and blocked Caesar's fist. However, the soldier did not seem to be in a good condition. He took a few steps back and finally stood firm with the extension of the armor on his leg. His reaction is not bad. Caesar looked at this guy with some surprise, and then carefully looked at the armor on these soldiers. In the control room of the F base, the Prime Minister looked at this inhuman criminal with a sneer. He liked to see the shocked faces of these inhuman criminals. In order to deal with the extraordinary speed of these Inhumans, Each of these special armors, called Dragon Cavalry, was equipped with more than 5 miniature high-speed video cameras, which could ensure that they could capture 360 degrees of movement without any blind spots from all directions. At the same time, in order to allow the user of the Dragon Cavalry to be able to deal with such terrifying motion capture, each user's body had been modified by a large amount of drugs and various technological means. Not only that, the Dragon Cavalry was also equipped with an auxiliary AI system, which could be used in both ways to deal with any special situation. And these were just the tip of the iceberg of the Dragon Cavalry armor technology. Tremble before the crystallization of mankind. Inhuman. Fire. Accompanied by the shout of the young man who seemed to be the leader of the F group, more than a dozen red light spots suddenly appeared on Kate's body. He seemed to be unable to react in time. He saw all the soldiers of the F group activate their weapons at the same time, and beam after beam of light crazily fell on Caesar's body. Boom, 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 boom. The courtyard in front of the monastery was filled with smoke and dust. The terrifying, destructive power of the weapons was like the bombardment of RPG shells, but at the same time, the high temperature of the weapons was so high that even the soil was melted. After a round of fire that lasted for 20 seconds, the leader of the F group made a gesture to stop the fire. In the thick smoke, they all activated their imaging scans. In the crystal display in front of their eyes, they saw that Caesar's figure was motionless in the thick smoke. His body didn't explode. In the control room, the image of the scan appeared at the same time. At this moment, the Prime Minister looked at the figure that seemed to be moving in the thick smoke. The ground had turned into scorched earth, and amid the potholes, Caesar's figure walked out of the thick smoke step by step. He was like a traveler walking on the land of purgatory. The Baroque-style coat was already broken. Caesar tore it open casually, and the coat was directly broken. Seeing his appearance, the members of the F group raised their weapons and aimed again. 20 scarlet light spots converged on Caesar's body again. This must be a lie. After 20 seconds of fire, they only managed to destroy this guy's coat? I see. At this moment, Caesar patted the ashes on his coat. If it's at this level, most of the Inhumans wouldn't be able to block it. Then, the only fate left would probably be a tragic death. Even I would be at a disadvantage if I were to fight with you guys like this. He shook his head and began to slowly unbutton his shirt. But at this moment, the members of the F group obviously didn't intend to wait. They started to design again. However, Caesar waved his hand to block, or rather, he waved his hand to slap them. His arms seemed to have turned into a phantom, and it seemed to be faster than the speed of light. He actually easily swatted away the beams of light that were shooting at him. At the same time, he didn't stop his action of unbuttoning his shirt with his left hand. Finally, under the horrified gazes of the F group, Caesar blocked this round of fire. The weapons had to enter a short cool-down period, and Caesar finally took off his shirt, revealing a body that was close to the golden ratio, but didn't bulge. The shirt hung naturally on his palm, and he gently let go of his hand. Boom! The moment the shirt hit the ground, the entire earth began to tremble. The seemingly light shirt smashed a huge crater into the scorched earth. The cracks on the edges spread all the way to the entire courtyard of the monastery, and the walls fell down with a loud crash. The moment his shirt fell to the ground, Caesar's legs lightly bounced off the ground, and the ground split open once more. Once again, he appeared in front of the F.S. member who had received his first punch. This time, he once again threw a punch at him. With a high-speed camera and the assistance of artificial intelligence, the F group's member only succeeded in lifting his finger this time. Boom! With this punch, the F group's member didn't fly backward as expected. The armor in front of his dragon knight's chest directly shattered. Then his entire body directly exploded. Blood mist drifted away. On the ground, only some fine fragments and blood clots were left. In the control room of the F group's headquarters, the Prime Minister suddenly stood up. His mouth was wide open, and his jaw seemed to be about to drop. It seemed like his eyes were wide open. The control room was dead silent. Moon Beast King? In the hotel, the psychic which was chatting with Farrell. After leaving the prison, the psychic which felt that the body of the Knight of Time was very smelly. So she insisted that he take a good shower and found a temporary hotel. After freshening up, Farrell's face looked better. Perhaps it was an illusion, but the spirit which felt that his flesh seemed to have grown a little, and he wasn't as shriveled as when he was in the castle prison. At this moment, Miss Julienne was cutting this knight's messy long hair, and they talked about some ancient knowledge. According to legend, only 1 out of 10 million orcs will be born as the Moon Beast King, and he will have the strongest power. Farrell looked at his face that was beginning to dry in the mirror, and he seemed to enjoy this spirit which cutting his hair. He continued, "Of course, this is just a legend, and I haven't seen it before." Chapter 13:01. On the road in the wilderness, a black pickup truck was running crazily. In the back of the pickup truck, Her Majesty was hugging Lancelot and curling up in a corner. As for Jodas, he looked at the two of them expressionlessly. Lancelot had no choice but to maintain his unconscious state. At this time, they could vaguely hear the sound from the monastery. Catherine, who was driving, looked at the dark night sky in the rearview mirror from time to time. She seemed to be a little absent-minded. Tipu in the passenger seat suddenly said, "Kitten, do you think the leader will transform this time? Or will he just try to use the power of the 12 holy armors?" Catherine frowned and said, "It's better not to. Do you think Caesar is made of iron?" Tipu didn't speak. He was silent for a long time. After a while, he said quietly, "I will become the most powerful secret pharmacist and refine that secret medicine." Little brat. Catherine sneered coldly, but there was some warmth in her eyes. The mist-like blood gradually dispersed and finally drifted to the cheek of one of the members of the Fianna. The cold wetness made him shiver suddenly. Then, the member of the Fianna started to scream crazily for some reason. He seemed to have been provoked by something. While screaming crazily, he even kept activating the various weapons on the Dragon Knight armor. Not only the big gun in his hand, but the shell-shaped thruster on the back also turned into a weapon at this time. The split mini-missiles shot out from the thrusters and dispersed in the air, directly bombarding Caesar's body. Not only that, he also abruptly pulled out the black gold saber equipped on his thigh and charged forward just like that. In the control room of the Fianna, the profile picture of this member on the screen flashed red at this time. The support staff who was monitoring at this time said in horror, "Number 17, the spirit value is abnormal. It has exceeded the alert value by 30%. It is in a dangerous state. How did it go over the warning level? Did you already adjust it?" The Prime Minister's hands were on the controls, and his mouth was wide open in shock before he finally let out an angry roar. Maybe it was caused by the death of one of their companions. They trained together and had a deeper relationship. So, the officer beside him had to guess and explain. Deep feelings? The Prime Minister was furious. They don't need feelings at all. The moment he turned around and glared at the officer, the alarm sounded again on the control panel in front of him, and the panicked and hurried voices of the support personnel were heard. Plane 5, lost contact. Plane 18, lost contact. Unit 22 was in critical condition. Airplane 7, lost control. Pilot number 10's mental strength has reached critical. Prime Minister, how could this be? On the screen, as the Dragon Riders were either destroyed or shot down one after another, the avatars of the members of the Fianna on the other screen quickly dimmed or flashed red. The Prime Minister's entire body was pale and powerless as he sat down in his chair. His arms couldn't help but tremble. At the monastery, Caesar was holding a member of the Fianna and slamming him into the ground. The huge impact even tore the soldier's arm and body apart. Only 7 of the 23 soldiers of the Fianna were left. One of them was even in a state of absent-mindedness. They stood on the ground stupidly, motionless. They had to enter the intelligent system of the Dragon Riders to control them. Can't win, can't win, can't win, can't win. Devil. This is the devil. He suddenly screamed in horror. As soon as he turned around, the shell-shaped wings of the propeller instantly spread out. The eruption of air pushed his body directly into the sky toward the huge fighter. Caesar took a deep breath and took out the lighter from his trouser pocket. He held it tightly and then used all his strength. Boom! A huge, air-piercing sound was heard. The next moment, the engine of the fighter was directly penetrated by the flung lighter, causing an instant explosion. The gigantic fighter lost control and crashed into the Fianna member who was trying to escape in fear. He watched in horror as the fighter jet smashed into his body and crashed into the ground. 7 people. Now, there were only 6 left in the team. The fighter jet crashed to the ground, destroying a large part of the land in front of the monastery. The blazing light illuminated the surroundings, and Caesar shifted his gaze to another member of the Fianna under the blazing light. It was a female member. Her body trembled as she stood on the spot. She held the big gun with both hands, but couldn't stop the body of the gun from shaking. She couldn't aim at all. The red light spots kept drawing circles on Caesar's body. Moisture began to spread from the combat uniform below her abdomen, accompanied by a faintly discernible heat. Finally, her legs went soft, and she directly knelt on the ground. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me! Don't!" Caesar walked to the front of the member expressionlessly. His eyes were indifferent. "We used to beg for mercy like this." He stretched out his palm, clenched his 5 fingers, and waved. If there was no accident, the head and body of this female member of the Fianna would be directly separated in the next moment. He waved his hand. "No!" The remaining member screamed miserably. However, his knife-like arm had already been waved. At this time, a head flew out and fell to the ground, rolling. When this decapitated body fell to the ground, the head also stopped rolling. Its head was stained with dust and plant ash, as if it was a piece of trash. It just opened its eyes that had yet to close, staring blankly at the night sky under the stars. Out of the 6, only 5 were left. "Retreat, retreat, 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 retreat. You guys stay too." Caesar jumped forward, leaping into the night sky like a cannonball, rushing toward one of the remaining 5 people. Just when this person closed his eyes in despair, a figure blocked in front of him, crossed his arms, and blocked Caesar's fist. He opened his eyes subconsciously and saw a guy wearing a yellow armor with a weird clown appearance. It seems that I rushed to the end. This clown in yellow armor, at this time, cracked a creepy smile on his scarlet lips. Caesar's jumping impact was not over yet, and he directly fought with this clown knight in the air. Both of their fists were like bullets, crazily shooting out, only to hear the continuous loud noises. In the end, both of them seemed to be on par with each other and fell to the ground. At the same time, a knight wearing dark blue holy armor appeared in front of the female head. He knelt on the ground on one knee, stretched out his hand over the pair of eyes that were not closed, and whispered, "I'm sorry that I couldn't appear by your side in time. Although we didn't know each other, I hope your soul can rest in peace. I believe that you must have been a beautiful lady when you were alive." He seemed to be praying. Caesar glanced sideways. Then he raised his head. The sound came from a night sky. He saw a helicopter slowly approaching. Unlike the exaggerated fighter jet, this helicopter was obviously an ordinary one. It was just an ordinary military model. At this time, a few more figures jumped down from the helicopter. There was a big man with a beard, a man wearing a highway police uniform, and even a guy wearing a doctor's gown. They were the 12 knights of the Round Table who were responsible for guarding the knight organization in various places. At this time, the man in the highway police uniform, Mr. Geraint, suddenly asked, "Why did the clown and Gareth put on the holy armor so early? Aren't they afraid of wasting their strength?" Who knows? Maybe it's because they're interested in getting the upper hand? The young man who looked like a doctor shrugged, then looked at the few remaining members of the Fianna. Who are these guys? They seem to be here to rescue the queen. Maybe they are from the government. The bearded man, Tresty, frowned and said, "When did the government make these things? It doesn't look like much." The clown, Dagonite, picked his ears with his fingers at this time and said to the survivors of the Fianna, "To avoid trouble, you should hide first. Don't worry, we won't do anything to you. Even if we want to do something, it will be our old man who will negotiate with your superiors." Of course, I'm more inclined to let you join in the scuffle, because I also want to see what these metal lumps on your bodies can do. The survivors of the Fianna, looked at each other at this time. Even so, the signal of their communicators was still good, and they were waiting for instructions from the headquarters. These 5 survivors not only maintained a stable mental state, but they even survived until the end under the terrifying power of Caesar. At the headquarters, although the Prime Minister's face was extremely ugly, he also knew that these unknown survivors were important. So without thinking, he ordered them to wait and see, to temporarily withdraw from the battlefield, and to be prepared to retreat at any time. How did the group of old guys from the night mechanism find this position? Could it be? The Prime Minister looked at the personnel in the control room suspiciously. This operation was a top-secret operation authorized by him, so it shouldn't have been leaked. He had to suspect that someone leaked the information to the old guy, Hopkins. Otherwise, this group of Knights of the Round Table, even if they found out something, they couldn't have come so quickly. The Fianna was almost wiped out. The appearance of the night mechanism and the mocking gaze of Hopkins, who was looking at all of this from behind, made the Prime Minister feel like he'd been threatened by some bored thugs a few years ago to broadcast a pig asterisk in front of the public. Of course, in the end, the thugs were successfully captured. At this time, the survivors of the Fianna listened to the order, slowly landed, and retreated to the edge of the battlefield, silent. Caesar didn't touch these people again, but just looked at Gareth, Clown, and the others. They sent out 5 current members of the Round Table at one time. It seems that the night mechanism really values me. Caesar adjusted his breathing. When facing the Fianna, it was a little easier because although this group of people had powerful weapons, they were not strong individually. At best, their physical fitness was comparable to that of ordinary orcs, and it was difficult for them to control the power of those weapons. But these knights were different. They were all elites who had been tempered, or else they wouldn't have been able to inherit the powerful power of the Round Table. Just in time, it's not too late. Geraint, who was wearing a highway police uniform, twisted his neck at this time. There's still time for you to finish your warm-up. Although I don't know who you are, looking at the situation here, I think you're not a nobody, right? Oberon, that's what you should call me in your information, Caesar said in a low voice. You're the leader of the myth of Doomsday. Gareth suddenly frowned. Mr. Clown whistled. Oh, you've won the prize. You're lucky. Indeed, I'm lucky. Caesar smiled at this time. It just so happens that my blood has become hot. Like I said, the warm-up is almost done. Several members of the Round Table looked at each other, and the young doctor suddenly said, "Who's going to do it?" Ganging up is not the spirit of the knight's belief. With that, he took the initiative to take 2 steps back, but his eyes were quietly looking at the monastery behind Caesar. Obviously, compared to dealing with the leader of the myth of Doomsday, he was more interested in finding an opportunity to enter the monastery to find out what was going on. After all, the most important task of the mission was to rescue the hostages. The shadow slowly stretched behind him, and then separated, turning into a vague shadow of a person, and then quietly flashed into the night. Is being sneaky the spirit of a knight? Unexpectedly, at this time, Caesar waved his hand, and the shadow person who was about 10 meters away was directly blown up and disappeared. The doctor waved his hand as if nothing had happened, and said with a bright smile, "Very good. If you're not going to do it, then I won't hold back." Mr. Clown's big smile appeared on his face, and with a swing of his hands, 8 throwing knives shot out at the same time. The speed of the throwing knives was not much slower than the speed of light of the weapons of the dragon riders. At this time, Caesar obviously did not intend to directly block or dodge like before. He staggered his body, as if he was dancing, and dodged through the gaps of the throwing knives. But how could the clown's attack be so powerful? He had already taken the initiative to attack. The clown, who was known as the strongest person at the Round Table of 12, obviously felt that his opponent was also a person with a strong body, so he wanted to compete with strength. The kind of fight where fists were shot out like bullets, causing waves to roll around, and punches and kicks could crack the earth. Undoubtedly, it was a big blow to the members of the Fianna. At the edge, we are going to surpass this group of people. Night mechanism it's just one person, and it's hard to tell who's the winner. They did not care about the reaction of the group of survivors. Geraint was a little surprised and said, "This is the first time I've seen it. This guy's strength is almost the same as the clown's. The clown's body is at the level of abnormal. It's really surprising. No wonder he has the courage to cause trouble in our territory. I'm also a little itchy." Gareth smiled bitterly in his heart. "That's because you haven't seen the one in the prison on the island." The clown did not even manage to block a punch, and directly fell to the ground and fainted. Suddenly, Caesar and the clown separated again. It seemed that neither side could do anything to the other. The clown suddenly changed into a crying face, but his expression was ecstatic. "What an interesting opponent! Let me be happier. The crazier you are, the stronger you will be. Instead of saying that you're a just knight, it's better to say that you're a crazy knight." Caesar shook his head. "I'm not interested in fighting with you. Are you planning to escape?" At some point in time, Geraint, the doctor, and Tresty had already moved to 3 different places behind Caesar, blocking his possible escape routes. After seeing that Caesar could fight the clown who had already put on the holy armor, they did not dare to be careless. At this time, they had already put on their own holy armor at the same time. At this time, Caesar's hands were hanging down, and he slowly exhaled. At the same time, he faced 5 members of the Round Table of 12, but his face was fearless. "Then let's try the so-called power of the holy armor. It will surprise you." The clown narrowed his eyes at this time, and when he was about to throw the flying knife, his body suddenly froze on the spot. At this time, a strange feeling came from his holy armor. Not only him, but the other 4 members of the Round Table of 12 also felt this strangeness at this time. Their eyes couldn't help but shrink, and they looked at the wave emitted from Caesar's body in disbelief. The wave of the holy armor. The power of inheritance of the Round Table of 12 actually resonated at this time. A black and purple light flashed on Caesar's body at this time, but in an instant, a black armor covered Caesar's body. "Lancelot, Lake, and indestructible Lake Light?" Gareth muttered to himself. How is this possible?" At this time, Caesar casually waved the indestructible lake light in his hand, and the sword wind instantly tore the air, directly tearing a big hole dozens of meters long on the ground. "Come on, Knights of the Round Table," Caesar said softly. Mr. Clown's head was buzzing at this time, and he finally understood the real meaning of the so-called test the power of the holy armor mentioned by this doomsday mythical leader. He felt that at this time, a voice sounded in his head at the same time. It seemed to ask him, "Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" Chapter 1302. In the manner of Sir Hopkins. When Caesar, who was wearing the Elotte de Lake, inherited holy armor, appeared on the screen, half of the people in charge of the Knight organization stood up in fright. "Please tell me this is just a joke." "Lancelot." They all looked at Sir Hopkins and saw that his eyes were also uncertain. Obviously, he didn't expect such a situation to happen. There was no such thing as forging a similar armor and bluffing. These people at least had the eyesight to distinguish the holy armor. Sir Hopkins quickly came to a decision. He immediately gave an order to the 12 knights at the scene. "We must keep him alive. He may have mastered the method of taking away the sacred armor from the inherited knights. We must not let this method leak out." No one questioned Sir Hopkins's orders. The inheritance of the 12 Knights of the Round Table was the foundation of the Knight organization since ancient times, and the method of inheritance had always been carried out in secret. It was like someone inventing a highly secure virtual currency, but hackers could dig deep into this gold mine and mine the currency as they wished. "Got it." Knight Gareth's finger temporarily turned off the communication device in his ear and nodded. Then he calmed himself down as fast as he could. "Everyone, it seems that now is not the time to be polite. The Knight organization has already given the order. We must capture Oberon, dead or alive." As expected, Knight Geraint was the first to react. Then he waved his hands, and a huge knight's lance appeared in his hands. Although the 512 Knights of the Round Table were fighting against an enemy who had used some unknown method to seize the power of the 12 Knights of the Round Table from Lancelot, Overall, they were not afraid. A formation of 5-12 knights fighting at the same time was very rare. Was it a problem of cooperation and tacit understanding? Impossible. They were all warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles and had an unimaginable amount of combat experience, so they could adapt to the situation as if it was instinct. When Gareth, Clown, Geraint, and Tresty attacked Caesar at the same time, the doctor was slightly slower. A shadow man quietly appeared behind him again, and then blended into the night. At this time, facing the siege of 4 members of the 12 Round Table at the same time, Caesar could not detect the appearance of the shadow man like before. After releasing the shadow men, the doctor joined the battle immediately. With the addition of the doctor in the latter half of the fight, Caesar felt as if the pressure on him had increased tremendously. His attitude of easily annihilating the F was no longer present. You must record their data. Although the operation this time has failed, the information on this group of Knights of the Round Table has always been very scarce. We must not miss anything. In the control room of the F headquarters, the Prime Minister, who had recovered slightly from the shock, gritted his teeth and gave orders to the survivors present. This was the only thing he could do at the moment, even if he was unwilling to do so. Unexpectedly, not only did they see the secret weapon of the British government, but they also saw 5 members of the 12 Round Table at once. Today is a day of celebration. Looks like, Comrade Little Wong, you've recorded it well. These Knights of the Round Table rarely make a move, and it's even rarer for 5 of them to be deployed at once. This is a great contribution. I know. Just as Caesar was fighting fiercely with the knights, the shadow men had quietly sneaked into the monastery. They passed through room after room at the fastest speed. However, they could only find an unconscious old priest trapped in a room. They could not find the whereabouts of Her Majesty the Queen at all. Finally, they came to the stone room used for imprisonment. When they saw the traces of the stone room, they understood that the Queen had been transferred here, and probably not too long ago. Is she trying to stall for time? So she stayed here alone? The shadow men rescued the old priest and sent him away. After that, they returned to the doctor. When they brought back this information, the doctor could not help but frown. On the battlefield, Caesar stood alone, and they had no one. Although they were not evenly matched, it was obvious that they would not be easily defeated. This ability to control the sacred armor set off waves in the hearts of these knights who had gone through countless trials and tribulations to inherit the sacred armor. When they found out that the Queen had been transferred away and that there was no one left in the monastery, Mr. Clown smashed half of the monastery with a punch, and the battle between them escalated. Every attack was as powerful as an RPG missile. With the monastery as the epicenter, they began to wantonly destroy everything in their surroundings. According to their orders, the few survivors who had been recording the battle felt their scalps go numb. The Dragon Cavalry also had weapons that could release such power, but they needed to be recharged, and there was a cool-down period after use. It was impossible for them to casually release it like this. In fact, their speed had already surpassed the maximum speed that the Dragon Rider's armor thrusters could reach, and yet they were still moving nimbly, able to turn at will. What was the purpose of our so-called adjustment and training in the past few years? One of them smiled bitterly and muttered to himself. At the same time, he could not help but have a despairing thought. If the non-humans in the world were to suddenly become active instead of being silent, would humans be able to resist them? One had to know that the 23 members of the Sacred Armor had gone through many rounds of selection and countless years of investment in manpower and resources to obtain their current combat ability. However, just one Oberon was able to effortlessly wipe them out as if it was child's play, and he did not even use his full strength at that time. No one cared about the bitterness in the hearts of the Sacred Armor members. Everyone's gazes were focused on this dangerous battle at this moment. The aftermath of the battle had reached hundreds of meters away from the monastery. However, these hundreds of meters were just a narrow stage for Caesar and the other 5 people at the round table. They could reach each other in an instant. How troublesome! Tresty, who was wearing a heavy armor, had no choice but to stop. Strictly speaking, Speed was not his specialty. He was not like the clown who had a powerful physical body and superhuman senses, nor did he have Gareth's exquisite sword skills. Nor was he like the doctor who was good at controlling agility. Tresty was better at defending and counterattacking. The heavy shield in his hand gave him the strongest defense, and he could accurately deliver a fatal blow behind a shield. Geraint, we can't drag this out any longer. I will raise the shield and release your strength to your heart's content. Tresty suddenly shouted. This was like a signal. In an instant, the doctor, Gareth, and the clown abruptly gave up on attacking Caesar. Instead, they all flashed and appeared behind Tresty. When Tresty raised the shield and stabbed it into the ground, a huge shield of light appeared at this moment. I have been waiting for you to say this. At this time, Geraint straightened the huge knight's spear in his hand. Starting from the top, the spear began to crack section by section. Then, a circular array with a diameter of more than 3 meters and filled with all kinds of strange characters appeared at the tip of the spear, spinning wildly. A terrifying power gathered on Geraint's spear. Even Caesar felt a sense of danger. Under the purple-black holy armor, Caesar frowned, but at the same time, he raised the indestructible lake light in his hand. On the blade of the sword, lines of characters similar to those on Geraint's spear began to appear. Elven engraving. Caesar directly slashed out with his sword. At the same time, Geraint's spear released a huge shockwave at the same time. Tearing and destroying collided with the air. Just the airflow produced by the collision of the two forces was like a hurricane. The leg armor of the Dragon Knight had already extended, but the impact of the collision was even more powerful and directly overturned the soil. They had to rely on the thrust of the thrusters and turn on the auxiliary intelligence to maintain the balance of their bodies in this turbulent airflow. The light covered the night sky. Even if it was just the suburbs, the city had probably noticed it at this time. But obviously, this was not the time to consider the impact. All eyes were fixed on the center of the terrifying impact. Did they defeat the leader of the myth of Doomsday? After the aftermath, the monastery no longer existed. What appeared in front of them was a deep crater with a diameter of nearly 100 meters. Everything had been annihilated, except for the shield that Tresty had erected on the ground, as well as the complete and long piece of land behind him. Of course, there was also Knight Gareth, the clown, and the doctor. Is he dead? Geraint appeared to be panting at this time. On the huge knight's spear in both hands, billowing steam was emitting. The air was distorted in a large area. The holy armor on his body peeled off in a large area, leaving only the parts on his arms and legs, but he suddenly shouted, "Be careful, he is not dead yet." Along with Geraint's shout, a figure slowly walked out of the thick, billowing steam. Caesar was still holding the indestructible lake light in his hand. When he walked, the sound of the sacred armor clashing against each other was especially loud in the night. He was not unscathed. At least the holy armor on his head was broken, revealing half of his face. At the same time, there were several crisscrossing cracks on the breastplate. Seeing this, Geraint raised his weapon again, and the clown and the others also walked out of the huge shield. The battle was not over yet. Well, it's almost time. Cass looked up at the night sky at this time. The clouds moved, and a bright moon hung high in the sky. Are you going to give up resistance? Mr. Clown smiled strangely and narrowed his eyes at the same time. Caesar slowly shook his head, suddenly looked at the helicopter that sent the knights here, and said indifferently, "I said, you have to give me an answer before tomorrow's sunrise. The time is not up yet, but you don't seem to follow the rules of the game. Since you intend to break the rules of the game, I don't mind adding some other elements to this game." With that, Caesar suddenly dispersed the indestructible lake light in his hand, along with the holy armor on his body. At the back of the body, there was a surge of movement. After that, a pair of wings that looked like huge palms but were connected to a blood-colored membrane spread out just like that. While everyone was bewildered, Caesar rushed into the night sky. The moment he stood under the bright moon, a loud whistling sound came out from his mouth. He opened his hands in the sky and shouted towards the sky. The loud whistling sound even resounded through the sky, long and endless. What does he want to do? Mr. Gareth frowned. But at this time, a scream came. The few members of the F at the edge of the sky were painfully covering their heads at this time. They were in extreme pain. The voice was filled with anger and sorrow. Even Gareth and the others felt dizzy at this moment. They felt that their bodies had become uncoordinated. And this whistling sound gradually spread to the night sky of the entire Fog City, on the streets of Fog City. The moment this horrible sound came, the glass cabinets of the shops on the street broke one after another. Suddenly, a pedestrian fell to the ground while holding his head in pain. "What happened to you?" A few passers-by came over and checked with concern. But the moment they turned over the man who fell to the ground, they saw that the man's eyes were scarlet. His teeth became sharp, and his whole body began to crazily grow brownish-black hair. In the blink of an eye, this man turned into a huge werewolf more than 2 meters tall. Roar! After turning into a huge werewolf, he suddenly pounced on the passers-by beside him and began to bite them. In the office, a programmer who was typing on the keyboard was now foaming at the mouth. But his body also began to uncontrollably mutate. He looked at his reflection on the screen in horror and finally fell to the ground. Suddenly, a huge claw stretched out and grabbed the table. It stood up. What the heck? In the street, the patrolling police car stopped, and a policeman walked out, looking up at the sudden, terrifying changes on the street. The fire, the thick smoke, the figure climbing on the outer wall of the building, the crowd screaming in fear as they fled, the chaotic mess of vehicles crashing into each other, the fallen fire hydrant that was splashing water, and the Hyundai car that was being held up by a monstrous thing in the traffic jam. Sub. The policeman suddenly shivered, remembering the communication device in the police car, and returned to the car while trembling. But the moment he opened the door, he was met with a pair of scarlet eyes. His patrol partner had turned into a monster with thick hair and directly pounced on him. Social work center. Miss Ork suddenly hugged her head and curled up on the ground. Olga, who was holding a guitar and learning from will, suddenly stood up absent-mindedly. Under everyone's surprised gaze, he walked to the window and looked up at the full moon. His pupils began to turn into vertical slits, emitting bits of gold. Suddenly, Olga fell to the ground and fainted. Miss Ork painfully stood up, as if she was enduring some kind of pain. Finally, she grabbed a pair of scissors and fiercely stabbed into her arm. She seemed to be better, even though blood began to flow down her arm. However, this scene alarmed everyone present, only to hear a commotion outside the social work center, and it seemed like there was a car crash on the street. Song Dynasty Hotel. Kitchen. Clang. The sound of the frying pan falling to the ground was heard. The steak on the frying pan was still medium rare, and the fragrance of the butter, and meat juice mixed together was still released. But at this time, the chef retreated step by step in horror. Finally, he had no way to go, and his body was pressed against the wall. With a trembling voice, the chef said in horror, Ayak. In front of him, there was a huge green thing that broke the chef's clothes, with fangs sticking out of its mouth and a hooked nose. The whole city was in an uproar. Top load next, you. Chapter 1303. Under the moonlight, Caesar, who was covered in a hazy layer of moonlight, flapped his strange fleshy wings that were like palms. His body also floated up and down slightly. He had stopped the terrifying whistling sound and was looking at the ground with cold eyes. After the terrifying sound stopped, the Knights of the Round Table didn't feel dizzy anymore. It didn't seem to be a sound wave attack. However, they couldn't be sure if it brought any hidden dangers. After all, this was a thug who had seized the power of the holy armor by some unknown means. No one knew what special effects were hidden in this whistling sound. Gareth and the others were motionless at this time, trying to cope with the changes by remaining unchanged. However, as time passed, the surroundings were as usual. Except for the wind becoming colder, it seemed that this whistling sound didn't really bring any spiritual harm. Caesar was still loftily floating in the air like a king, looking down at the ground. At this time, the doctor suddenly frowned, and his expression changed drastically. He even blurted out, "What did you say? The Fog City is rioting? What happened?" The other four people looked at the doctor one after another. His expression was solemn. At the same time, he looked up at Caesar under the moonlight, gritted his teeth, and said, "Now, in all the districts of the Fog City, those registered orcs are in a state of frenzy and are destroying everywhere. Look." The doctor pointed into the distance at this time, which was the direction of the Fog City. Everyone looked over and saw little sparks rising up at this time. Half of the city had been dyed red, and even on several tall buildings, raging flames could be seen. It's his whistling sound. In an instant, they realized the real purpose of Caesar's action at the same time. "Oberon, you actually—" In the night, Caesar was like an actor who was about to take a curtain call on the stage. He bowed slightly. "Then, please enjoy the special performance I have prepared for you. You want to escape?" Gareth stabbed the sword toward the sky, crazily. At this time, Caesar took out a strange scroll from who knows where. After opening it, when the sword light arrived, what was stabbed was only his afterimage. He had already disappeared. "What do we do now?" Everyone gathered again. Mr. Gareth said with a solemn expression, "As far as I know, there are about 300 TV series with orc bloodline registered in the Fog City. If we let these guys continue to destroy, I'm afraid that the Fog City will. 300 orcs with their bestial nature in a bustling city. The destructive power they brought could be imagined." Bang, 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 bang. On the street, the sound of bullets being fired was so loud. The fire spread on the sidewalk, and overturned cars could be seen everywhere. At this time, the police of Fog City were building a parking lot with police cars. More than a dozen Fog City police officers were using the police cars as cover, madly shooting at a huge object nearly 5 meters in front of them. The bullets pierced through the giant creature's body. Blood gushed out, but it did not stop the terrifying creature's destructive actions. Instead, it aroused its ferocious nature. It became even more violent. Fangs like that of a wild boar protruded from its lower jaw. When it opened its mouth, it looked like the teeth of a demon. It tore the door of the car next to it and used it as a shield. Then, it continued to move forward. The standard pistols used by the Fog City's police officers couldn't stop its advance at all. Suddenly, it leaped high into the air and landed heavily on top of the police car. Its huge weight instantly pressed down on the car, shattering the glass of the police car window. It bent down and roared again. A Fog City's police officer was so scared that he collapsed on the ground, trembling in horror. Similar situations were happening on the streets of many places. It was like the end of the world. The Fianna headquarters control room. Mr. Prime Minister slammed his fist on the table. He stared angrily at what was happening on the screen. He gritted his teeth, his eyes full of resentment, and his voice seemed to be saying something. "Oberon, Mr. Prime Minister," several ministers called you at the same time. In addition, there are military generals. Who do you want to respond to first? "Call all the major TV stations and communication operators for me." The Prime Minister stood up quickly. "I want to stop all information transmission in Fog City within 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Do you want the outside to be as chaotic as here?" The Prime Minister said angrily. "I don't have the time to care about how to deal with the outside world. What I need is to stop this riot." "I understand." The officer nodded quickly, but the calls from the ministers and military leaders were still ear-piercing. "Then these calls? Hang up." The Prime Minister took a deep breath. "Also, connect me to Sir Hopkins's phone." When the communication between the Fianna headquarters and the Knights organization in Sir Hopkins's manor was connected, both sides saw the ugly expressions on each other's faces. The Prime Minister was surprised to see the people in charge of the Knights organization sitting in front of the huge round table. He frowned. After a few seconds of silence, Sir Hopkins took the lead and said, "Mr. Prime Minister, it seems that the place where you are should be commanding those strange armored soldiers." "Hopkins," the Prime Minister said in a deep voice, "I'm not in the mood to quarrel with you here, and it's not the time. I've already mobilized the army for the riot in Fog City, and I need the help of your Knights organization. Tell me, how many of these monsters are there in Fog City?" "They're orcs." Sir Hopkins stood up and said, or they're mixed-blood descendants of orcs and humans. They're not monsters. Your knight's organization actually allows these monsters to intermarry with humans? The Prime Minister's eyes widened, and then he restrained the anger in his heart. Forget it. It's not the time to care about this. Tell me the number. If this kind of violence is grouped, then the approximate number should be about 340. 340? How many things haven't you told the cabinet? Sir Hopkins said indifferently. Our knight's organization is also quite interested in those soldiers who have powerful weapons. The Prime Minister was silent for a while. Then he gritted his teeth and said, How many people can you send? Are you sure you can suppress these monsters? Orcs? I don't want the army's artillery to face this city. You're in charge of evacuation and rescue. Sir Hopkins took a deep breath and said, We'll suppress this riot as soon as possible. Very good. I don't want to see any orcs leave Fog City. This is just like a plague. The screen turned off. Everyone at the round table looked at Hopkins. The old knight sighed and waved his hand, saying, Order all the knights to move out. As long as they still have the ability to fight, they should move out no matter where they are. Everyone, I'll have to trouble you to transfer some people from your organization as soon as possible. This time, they were escorting the key of the Holy Grail to Fog City, although there were 12 knights guarding them. In fact, there weren't many knights accompanying them. Everyone looked solemn, nodded, and left the conference room one after another. They each went to command the organizations in their jurisdiction. Only Sir Hopkins and the Great Knight with a magic sword, Simpton, were left here. Sir Hopkins suddenly asked, How many souls are left on a magic sword? Simpton replied expressionlessly, The information obtained from activating the Holy Grail has been used up. It's used up so much. Sir Hopkins pondered for a moment, then said seriously, Mr. Simpton, we need more sacrifices. Only the power of the Holy Grail can erase the effects of this riot. Come forward. Great Knight Simpton directly walked forward and knelt in front of Sir Hopkins with one knee. He lightly pressed the staff in his hand on the knight's shoulder. Knight, I give you the glory. Please bring us light. Yes, my lord. This might be the most unbelievable day of my life. Will thought. He was at a loss of what to do with the chaos outside. The signal seemed to have been cut off in an instant. Not only could he not connect to any network, but he couldn't even connect to the phone. There was also no signal on the TV. It was as if he was disconnected from the whole world in an instant. His friend was still anxiously trying to make a call. Will's face was a little pale, and his hands were just moving mechanically. He was bandaging the wound on Ms. Orc's arm. Although he didn't know why she was hurting herself, it seemed like she was using this method to relieve some kind of pain. After Olga suddenly fainted, he was held in Ms. Orc's arms. It seemed like he didn't wake up. Instead, Mr. Klein was talking to someone on the phone. Why can your phone still be connected? This is specially made by our agency. It uses a private channel. Klein quickly turned around and said, Now all the communication outside has been cut off. It's very chaotic. I'm sorry. I can't explain it to you in an instant. Please don't leave here because it's very dangerous outside. I know it's very dangerous. Looking out the window, there was a fire in a building not far away, and there were smashing sounds outside the street. One of Will's friends suddenly trembled. Perhaps it was a subconscious action, but when he looked at Ms. Orc again, there was a trace of fear in his eyes. He even couldn't help but take half a step back. At this moment, a violent collision sounded from the entrance of the social work center. Klein's face changed, and after telling everyone to stay, he hurriedly rushed out. When Klein rushed to the entrance of the social work center, he saw a car had directly crashed into the lobby. The car kept shaking. Inside the car, he saw a black man with an eye patch who was currently being pressed to the seat by something. He was holding on to his own body, and his hands were desperately resisting the huge arm of the other party. Nick, Klein was shocked, and he opened the door and kicked the huge object out of the other side of the car door. At the same time, he dragged Nick out of the car door. I don't know why this orc suddenly went crazy on the way here. Nick panted and said hurriedly, All the orcs in the city are going crazy. Klein said quickly, For the details, you can see the announcement on the agency's intranet. Now, protect yourself first, because at this moment, the orc that was kicked out had already stood up again. Its clothes were already tattered, and only a few pieces of cloth were left hanging on its body. It was almost 2 meters tall, and its arms were much thicker than a normal person's legs. It had sharp claws and fangs, and its whole body was emitting a ruthless aura. Klein took a few deep breaths. He didn't bring any weapons with him, so it wouldn't be easy to deal with a crazy orc with his bare hands. There's spare equipment in the trunk of the car. "Nick, I love you," Klein cried out in surprise. He stood up from the front of the car and quickly kicked the orc. After knocking the orc away, he hurriedly took out a war hammer and a round shield from the trunk of the car. Like a foot fighter, Klein used the war hammer to hit the round shield a few times, making a sound to attract the orc's attention. "Hey, big guy, do you like to eat apple pie?" The orc was provoked and rushed out crazily. Klein dodged to the side and hit the round shield again at the same time. "Big guy, over here." The orc roared angrily and rushed out crazily again. Klein dodged perfectly again, and the orc's body crashed directly into the wall behind Klein. The huge force caused the orc's upper body to directly smash through the wall, and its body was stuck in the wall. The moment it pulled its head out, the war hammer directly hit its face. The war hammer was infused with the powerful strength that the knights had cultivated for many years. When the hammer hit, it immediately woke up the orc and made it dizzy, but it obviously didn't lose the ability to move. Klein swung the war hammer again, but at this time, a figure blocked in front of him. The orc lady opened her hands and blocked in front of the orc. "Move! On! Please! Please! He's very dangerous." The orc lady had to quickly take out her phone and quickly said a few words. "This isn't his intention. He's just lost. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. I can calm him down. Please believe me." Klein subconsciously looked at Nick, who was not far away. After the two of them quickly exchanged glances, Klein slowly nodded and then took a few steps back. But the war hammer and the round shield were still raised. After a short period of dizziness, the orc went berserk again. It didn't care who was in front of it and directly grabbed it with its hands. At this time, the orc lady nimbly dodged the orc's attack and held its face with both hands. Then she put her forehead on the orc's forehead and stared at the orc with her amber eyes. She said something in a low voice with a strange rhythm. It was like a language, but also like a song. But miraculously, this berserk orc seemed to have really calmed down. Klein and Nick looked at each other again and couldn't help but frown. The alarm sounded all of a sudden. Outside the window, the city began to appear. Looking down from the suite on the upper floor of the Song Dynasty Hotel, the city seemed to be suffering from the flames of war. Luaccio looked at it silently. At this time, the door of the suite suddenly opened. The servant girl walked in slowly with a man in ragged clothes. The man was unconscious, but his ragged clothes could vaguely be seen that it should be a chef's uniform when it was intact. "Master, I brought him back." The servant girl threw him on the ground. There should only be this in the hotel. Luaccio nodded. When he looked outside again, he suddenly said, "Do you think this is the third time?" Obviously, they were already in the hotel room. Chapter 1304. Bang! A gigantic figure directly broke through the door and smashed into the wall, then slid down. After sliding down, it didn't move at all because its life force had completely disappeared. A fist-sized bloody hole could be seen on its chest. Behind the broken door, the spirit which slowly walked out. After a casual glance, she turned around. In the room, Farrell, who had cleaned up his hair and body, wore a white suit and a blue shirt, and slowly walked out. Miss Witch's handiwork was good. She didn't give the fiercest and evilest knight in history a strange hairstyle. Instead, she trimmed his hair short and dry. His whole body seemed to have become stronger. He really began to gain weight. Miss Witch thought to herself, "Is this guy really poisoned and only has 10% of his strength? Why did this guy suddenly go berserk?" Miss Witch furrowed her brows. The Night Agency should have injected all the registered orcs with a vaccine to suppress the berserk. Farrell just said indifferently, "The vaccine used now should be based on the old formula. Although the effect is still there, after generations, some antibodies have been produced in their bodies. Their bestial nature hasn't been obliterated. Instead, once it's stimulated, it will become even worse. As he spoke, he turned his head to look out of the window. The city was ablaze, and screams were incessant. Suddenly, Farrell's eyes locked on the spirit witch. His eyes were like eternal starlight. Even though she had the power of the soul, she felt so small under the vast, starry sky. Miss Julienne reluctantly showed a charming smile. "Mr. Knight, are you going to ask me out on a date?" Farrell pondered for a moment, then frowned. "What role did you play in this incident?" Almost as soon as he spoke, Farrell had already made his move, ignoring all of the spirit witch's defenses as if he was holding a child. He directly grabbed her neck, lifted her up, and pressed her against the wall. She struggled painfully, her legs kicking in the air, but she only felt more and more suffocated. Were the Knights of the Round Table this desperate when they faced Farrell? It's me. I'm the one who rescued you from prison to give you the antidote," she said with difficulty, her hands gripping the other person's arm tightly, her eyes filled with fear. Between opening and closing his eyes, Farrell suddenly became quiet. His fingers slowly loosened. They loosened very slowly, and his fingers seemed to be very stiff. Miss, which didn't have time to wait for his fingers to loosen completely. She struggled and pried Farrell's fingers open. She was able to escape and slid down the wall to sit on the ground. She breathed frantically, and at the same time, her body couldn't help but tremble slightly. She raised her head and looked at the calm man in horror. "You still haven't answered my question." Without the slightest bit of consolation, he just stared at the witch coldly. "Don't worry, I won't change my promise. I will do what I promised you. I will personally deliver what you want to get to your tombstone." "You—" Miss Ji Lien shuddered subconsciously. At the most dangerous moment just now, she used her spiritual power, intending to invade the other person's heart. However, her power instantly crushed the madness, violence, grief, and all kinds of negative emotions in the other person's heart. For a moment, she felt as if she had spent 100 years in the spiritual world, as if she had gone through hell. "Oberon!" After a few painful coughs, she greedily breathed in the fresh air and said nervously, "He's the leader of an organization called the Myths of Doomsday. This organization has recruited many people on the Magician Association's wanted list. At first glance, it seems to be an organization that opposes the Magician Association. But in fact, it's not. It's actually an organization that's involved in the liberation of the orcs. The core members of the Myths of Doomsday are almost all people with orc blood." "Orcs?" Farrell was deep in thought. Miss Witch continued, "I spent a lot of time to get close to the inside of this organization. The antidote I gave you before was made by a secret pharmacist in the Myths of Doomsday. Of course, I spent a lot of effort to collect the ingredients." After saying this, she quietly looked at Farrell. Seeing that there was no change in his expression, she lowered her head and continued speaking. "Raise your head and look at me." The witch had no choice but to raise her head helplessly. She gritted her teeth and said, "I overheard their plan this time, so I had an idea, but it's just an idea. However, the goddess of fate seems to favor me. During their first operation, one of their members failed and was captured by the knights." "Did he really fail?" Farrell's gaze instantly turned sharp. Yes, it was sharp. Miss Witch suddenly shuddered and quickly said, "It's true. I originally planned to do it myself, but I don't know why Rend was seriously injured and fell into the hands of the clown Dargoni. I'm not lying." "Continue." Miss Witch slowly said, "The people of the Myths of Doomsday once asked me to help these members of the operation to protect them from being captured and interrogated. With my protection, Rend won't be able to speak for a short time. At this time, the knights couldn't do anything. So you appeared in front of them and asked to see me in exchange?" Farrell quickly figured out the cause and effect and shook his head slightly. "They're no different from committing suicide." Miss Witch defended herself. "How can a small organization like this fight against the entire Knight organization and the British government? Since they're going to die and have the belief that they're going to die, why can't I make use of them? You're very much like your mother." Farrell suddenly said softly. Miss, which was absent-minded for a moment. As if it was an illusion, she seemed to see a little bit of complexity in the man's eyes. But he quickly asked in a low voice, "Nothing else? I don't like to have any lies." "There's really nothing else. Nothing else." Miss Witch said hurriedly. But what?" Miss Witch frowned and said, "I'm just guessing. It seems that the leader of the myths of Doomsday had contact with someone from the government before the start of this plan. I suspect that Oberon's operation this time isn't so simple. There must be something fishy going on. I really don't believe that Oberon would do something so stupid. It's just that my power can't invade his mind, so I don't know what he's really thinking. And he has never really trusted me. Even in this operation, it's only the real members of the myths of Doomsday. At least 1/3 of them are still playing the game of cat and mouse with the Magicians Association in Europe, but no matter what, I've successfully rescued you from prison." Stupid. Farrell looked at the spreading fire outside the window and pondered. Suddenly, he turned around and walked out. Miss Witch quickly asked, "Where are you going? Other than helping you find something to do something else." Farrell directly walked down the stairs of the hotel without looking back. Miss Witch had no choice but to scramble to her feet and hurried after him. Inside the social work center, the crazy orc was tied with a special binding belt made by the night mechanism. This was one of the tools found in Nick's car. But at this time, this crazy orc was obviously not completely calmed down. Its scarlet eyes were still open, and saliva kept flowing out of its mouth. It didn't really stop its crazy state and return to its original state. Instead, it was in a state of being on the verge of erupting like a volcano. It was as if it would go crazy again with just a slight stimulation. But no matter what, Miss Orc's method of comforting it was obviously effective, but the effect wasn't ideal. Lael was a little scared and also a little confused. At this time, she hugged her hands and stood in front of it, showing a sad expression. Klein and Neil walked over and opened the translation software. Klein slowly said, "Miss Lael, it's obvious that he's not in a good situation now. Do you know what happened?" Lael seemed to be a little scared. She looked at the night sky outside, calling. We heard a primitive call. It stimulated the most primitive beast in our hearts. They couldn't resist this primitive impulse, so they lost themselves and fell into a state of madness. That's why you hurt yourself to wake yourself up? Klein quickly realized the meaning behind her actions. Lael nodded silently. "I'm a mixed blood, so my beast nature is weaker than that of a pure blood." Klein took a deep breath and said, "Miss Lael, the situation now is more dangerous. I'll make it short. There's a thug who used some unknown method to force all the orcs in the Fog City into a frenzy. You've seen it too. The entire city is like a sea of fire. We need you, Miss Lael. Or rather, we need your method to calm them down." This was the result of a short discussion between Klein and Nick after seeing Lael's strange behavior. They didn't immediately tell the night mechanism because they weren't sure if it would work. Moreover, the night mechanism in the Fog City was more or less empty now. All of them were mobilized, including the logistics staff, and had started to carry out the mission of suppressing the riot. "You're talking about the Moon Contract?" Lael frowned. "The song you sang is called Moon Contract." Lael nodded. "That's the song we sing when we worship our ancestors. It can calm us down. I don't know if it really works, but I wanted to try it. You saw it too. The effect wasn't too obvious. It was still on the verge of chaos, like a beast that was chained up. It would struggle from time to time and roar a few times, even if it can only slow down their actions a little." Klein quickly said, "This will be of great help to us too. Lael, can you help us with this?" Lael frowned. "Why should I help you? Help you suppress my people and then wait for your butcher's knife to fall? We just want to solve this crisis," Klein said sincerely. "We don't intend to hurt anyone, no matter if it's humans or you. Do you know that your clansmen all have legal identities and official jobs here? They could have lived peacefully, but now they've fallen into endless pain. I believe that they live here with their families, companions, friends, and neighbors. I deeply believe that if they're awake, they wouldn't want to see us destroy this city. You can feel the pain in their hearts." The girl fell into hesitation. She turned around and looked at the tormented and violent orcs. She couldn't bear to see them like this. "Please believe in us. Believe in me, Miss Lale." Klein bowed 90 degrees and then quickly raised his head. He reached out and pressed Nick's waist down 90 degrees as well. "I'm a knight. I only want to help them and quell this chaos. After this, I'll definitely plead with my superior, one of the great 12 knights, Mr. Gareth, and ask him to plead for mercy for these orcs. They're only victims, not sinners who should be treated unfairly." "You're not lying." Lale exhaled softly and finally nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try. But what should I do? Teach you the moon contract?" Klein was overjoyed. Nick, who could finally straighten his back, snatched Klein's phone and began to speak. "I'm afraid that's not possible. I don't think we have the ability to unleash the power of this lullaby, so we still need you. This is a song for our sacrifice, not a lullaby." The orc lady was extremely fierce. "Whatever," Nick quickly said. "I already have a preliminary plan, but I need all of you to take action and do me a favor." As he spoke, Nick looked out the window at a truck that had crashed into the wall of the social work center due to the chaos. He whistled and said, "First, we need to modify this big guy." Song Dynasty Hotel. The door of the presidential suite opened in a hurry. Mr. Chinbide was holding a metal baseball bat in his hand and wearing an ancient chainmail from Europe. He looked hurried. "Master Chio." "Oh God, that's great. You're fine." Mr. Chin looked like a loyal protector. He pressed down on the motorcycle helmet on his head with one hand. "It's very dangerous outside. Master Chio, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. I called all the security guards to this floor. I guarantee that not a single gray wing can fly in." A fly flew past his eyes. "Come, Pa." Seeing Peter Chan's strange appearance, Boss Luo couldn't help but ask curiously, "Mr. Chun, where did you get this armor?" This is an antique in the exhibition room. I'm wearing it." Peter Chan puffed out his chest and said, "How about it? There are a few more. Should I give you one too?" "I think I should." "Thank you." Luochio smiled slightly, "But I don't think it's necessary. By the way, Mr. Chan, are you sleepy?" "Sleepy?" Peter Chan immediately said, "Why would I be sleepy at this time? I'll definitely be on my best behavior. I don't care what kind of thugs or terrorist organizations they are. If they dare to come, I'll let them come in vertically and go out horizontally." "No, you're sleepy," Luochio said softly. "You're sleepy too." Silently, Peter Chan directly fell to the ground and made a sound of sleeping. The sound spread out. At the same time, the sound of falling to the ground could be heard outside the door. In an instant, all the guests, staff, and even the rats that were running away in the parking lot in the Song Dynasty Hotel lost consciousness. Luo Chio waved his hand, and light curtains appeared, covering the area in front of him. He said casually, "So, where should I start?" Yin 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 PS, 7/30. Why did it still increase? Chapter 1305. 1939, the end of August. Princess Elizabeth, who was 15 years old, had grown into a slim girl. She was wearing a strange military uniform, and her face was painted with a special paint, which covered her beautiful face. With the help of her tutor, she quietly hid from everyone in her family and came to a small country in Europe to undergo some kind of training. In the 3 years of learning, not only did she learn horsemanship, swordsmanship, and even marksmanship, the young princess already had a high level of attainment. At the same time, her cultural lessons were also praised by her father. There was no doubt that the young princess already had the qualifications to become an outstanding woman. She was in a train. In the rear half of the carriage, the sweaty princess was holding a standard long sword in one hand and a short Soviet pistol in the other. There were 7 men lying on the ground. They were wearing the uniform of the SS, which was the same as the military uniform the princess was wearing. Blood slowly flowed out of their bodies and finally gathered into a stream, which spread to the princess' boots. The princess leaned against the door of the carriage tiredly. Her trembling hand suddenly loosened, and the sword in her hand fell to the ground. Not because of fear, but because her fingers were numb, which made it difficult for her to hold the weapon in her hand. Moreover, there was a bleeding wound on her arm. The princess gritted her teeth, tore off her undershirt, and used both her hands and mouth to bandage the wound. Then, she sighed, opened the door, and walked out of the carriage. At the same time, she took off her clothes and threw them into the river under the bridge where the train passed by. Her Royal Highness took out a package from the bottom of the carriage where the two carriages were connected. After opening it, it was revealed that there was a lady's dress inside. After putting on the dress, the princess turned into a delicate lady and walked into the front carriage. She walked forward gracefully and soon came to the dining carriage. She found a seat and lifted her skirt slightly with both hands. Then she crouched down and bowed before slowly sitting down. Opposite her was a woman with long blonde hair and deep blue eyes. She was enjoying a cup of warm black tea. "Teacher, you're injured," the blonde woman suddenly said. Her Royal Highness bit her lip. "If I'm not careful, continue to be a dictionary tonight," the blonde woman said expressionlessly. Her Royal Highness lowered her head, thinking that if that was the case, it was fine. She even had a feeling of relief. Her teacher began to admire the scenery outside the window. Her Royal Highness secretly looked at the side of his face and became somewhat infatuated. "Is there something on my face?" The teacher noticed the princess's gaze. No. The princess's mind had been well trained in the past few years, so she quickly said, "I'm just thinking. When will the war break out?" "Very soon," the blonde woman replied casually. Her Royal Highness picked up her teacup and took small sips of it. She also began to watch the scene of the train speeding past. It was like a white horse passing through a crack in the sky. A few days later, England and France officially declared war on Germany. Bumpy seemed to have stopped. The linen cloth covering her body was suddenly lifted, and it was still dark. But she could vaguely see the flames in the night sky, and the sound of gunfire kept coming from the city, and a strong figure in front of the queen, the strong old man named Judas. "My queen, we've arrived. You don't need me to help you get off the car, right?" Judas said indifferently. Lancelot, who was in the queen's arms, slightly opened her eyes at this time. She still looked weak, but her fingers were quietly writing something in the queen's palm. "I think I need it," the queen said in a sharp voice. "Sir, how can an old and weak person like me get off from here? We even have wounded people here." Judas obviously didn't want to quarrel too much. Without saying anything, he picked up the queen, jumped off the back of the pickup truck, and landed steadily on the ground. "Oh, you're really a gentleman," the queen exclaimed in surprise. Judas nodded and said indifferently, "Let's go in. You should be familiar with this place." The queen raised her head and looked at the destination in front of her, a huge building, the largest clock in Fog City. "Of course," the queen said softly. "The clock tower of the Palace of Westminster, also known as the Elizabeth Tower. So, is this the last place you prepared for me?" The queen looked back. Judas didn't say anything, but Catherine got off the car at this time. She put one hand on the queen's shoulder and pushed her to the building in front of her. "Madam, you should learn from the gentleman just now. You hurt me." "Damn old woman." At this time, Judas looked at Lancelot, who was still in the back of the truck, and seemed to be considering whether to carry her down. But Lancelot stubbornly propped up her body and climbed down from the truck little by little. Then she staggered and followed. Along the way, the security guards had fallen to the ground and were unconscious. There were some traces of fighting in the corridor. After all, this was the British Parliament, the House of Lords and House of Commons, so naturally, there must be some guards. A large number of murals and sculptures were carved in the corridor, also known as the West Church. Finally, they stopped in front of a hall and walked in. This was not the place for a state funeral. In front of the red carpet, a middle-aged man in bartender clothes was already waiting for them. "Judas, you're so slow." "Ha, Doba's my brother." Judas stepped forward and gave him a big hug. Lancelot, on the other hand, looked around the hall. She found a large number of production equipment placed here and suddenly had a bad feeling. The queen didn't tell her the plan of the doomsday myth from the beginning. "Where's Caesar?" Dobas frowned and asked. The secret pharmacist Tipu walked up quickly and said, "Didn't you notice what happened in Fog City? The leader is now giving them an extra performance. Dobas nodded thoughtfully. At this time, the door of the hall opened again, and a naked man stood at the door. Catherine cried out in surprise and ran over. "Caesar, you're back." He nodded and took a step forward. However, he suddenly fell forward. Catherine came in time and helped him up before he fell to the ground. "You? How are you?" "I'll be fine after a rest." Caesar's lips were a little pale. "The consumption of the holy armor is beyond my imagination. Sure enough, it's a little difficult to use it without the inheritance ceremony." "Tipu!" Catherine turned back and shouted. Tipu had hurried forward with several bottles of secret medicine in his hand and began to concoct something on the spot. "Leader, you're too reckless." Caesar waved his hand and took the secret medicine Tipu concocted at the last minute. After taking it, he slowly walked to the queen with Catherine's help. "Sir, you don't look very good." The queen sized him up and said, "I know a few good doctors. Maybe if you stop this now, you'll get good treatment." "Thank you." Caesar chuckled. "You should worry more about yourself." "Queen, there's not much time left. My pet is gone," the queen suddenly said. "Her Majesty the Queen," said coldly, and then looked around anxiously. "Did you see that?" Judas Dobas, send the queen to rest." Caesar waved his hand. After the queen was sent away, Caesar came to Lancelot. Lancelot frowned and said, "You really used the holy armor?" "Don't worry, your colleagues are fine. After all, I can't die for the time being. It's not worth leaving one or two behind and not being able to come back." He then waved his hand. Catherine was a little reluctant, but she still helped Lancelot leave. In the hall, only Tipu was there to take care of Caesar. He began to concoct something again and asked with concern, "How do you feel?" Caesar leaned against the counter and sat down. He smiled casually and said, "Terrible." Tipu frowned and said, "You definitely didn't force yourself to use the holy armor. You definitely didn't listen to advice and used the Beast King's body. Remember, you're not a real Beast King. Even if you have secret medicine, there will be side effects." "I have points," as he said. He took out a phone. After the call was connected, Tipu could hear the roar even without the speaker. "Oberon, you bastard from head to toe. Didn't you attack us with your toys first?" Caesar sneered. "The cooperation is over." Beep. In front of the door, Lancelot was casually pushed in by Catherine. At this time, she was retying Lancelot with layers of iron chains. Hammerstone is relatively brittle, but at least it will be worn off after 8 to 10 days of continuous grinding, Catherine said indifferently. "If I were you, I wouldn't waste my strength." I was discovered. Lancelot's face changed slightly. "Besides, I think it's better if you don't have strength," Catherine suddenly said. Lancelot furrowed his brows. After Catherine tied a new chain, she squinted and smiled. "Those marking worms, in addition to temporarily peeling off your holy seal, seems to have some side effects." "What do you mean? A virgin should be very flustered, right?" Catherine gently lifted her chin and then slowly left the room under Lancelot's angry gaze. After Catherine closed the door and left, Lancelot quickly walked to the door and listened. After a while, she spat out an iron wire from her mouth. "It was found on the back of the pickup truck. Is it really good for us to do these things? We're not superheroes." In the social work center, Chung Iran and another person were moving boxes of things, according to the instructions of the one-eyed black man called Neil. "It's better than doing nothing," Chung Iran said softly. "Chung, I need to go to the toilet. You go first." His companion shivered, put the things on the ground, and then hurriedly ran into the toilet. Chung Iran shook his head and continued to move the things, but when he passed by the room used to trap the orc, he stopped. He curiously opened the door and looked in. No matter how many times he saw it, he felt it was so incredible. In the place where he lived, there was actually such a creature that only existed in fantasy. If orcs really existed, then in his homeland, did monsters also exist? He thought subconsciously, but he seems to be quieter than before. Chung Iran noticed that this orc seemed to be in a drowsy state. He didn't seem to be on the verge of exploding like before. He frowned, and then found that in the room, besides this orc, there was actually a small figure. It seemed to be called Oga. That orc girl's brother. What surprised Ching was that this orc boy who looked like a girl was holding a guitar and playing an incomplete song. Original scenery of Homeland. Chung Yaran couldn't not recognize this song, because this song was accidentally given to him after he met Will. Chung Yaran vaguely heard about the moon contract in the conversation between Klein and Nick. It seemed to be able to restrain these orcs' violence, and the orc girl was also preparing for this. Seeing this magical scene, Chung Yaran subconsciously pushed the door open and walked in. This soft voice startled Olga, and he stood up in a panic. At the same time, he stood there uneasily, not knowing what to do. Chung Yaran waved his hand and tried to make his voice softer. He thought of something, took out his phone, and began to translate the Turkish language. "Why don't I teach you the next part of this song?" Olga was startled and then nodded. Chung Yaran looked nervously at the orc who was tied up tightly, then slowly approached Olga and took him from his hands. He began to play. Outside the social work center, a group of people were busy working on the minivan that crashed into the wall. Neil had a simple blueprint in his hand. "It won't work. This thing can't be used at all. The engine has been damaged." Will wiped his sweat and shook his head. Klein frowned and said, "Maybe we can use another car to pull it, as long as it can move." They were still discussing when their work suddenly stopped. The orc girl looked at these guys with some distrust. She doubted if their so-called plan would work. She sighed and then leaned against the wall, waiting for the result of their discussion. But at this moment, two strong rays of light suddenly shone. Behind the strong rays, there seemed to be a huge monster. The orc girl immediately became alert. Knight Klein even directly picked up the warhammer. Even Will, in a panic, grabbed a wrench. Finally, the behemoth slowly came to a stop. When the light stopped, what appeared in front of them was a huge mobile performance van that had been modified with a lot of spray-painted graffiti and a strong rock and roll style. A young man in a black jacket jumped down from the driver's seat. At the same time, a blonde woman also jumped down from the passenger's seat. The man and woman's faces were even printed with decorative makeup. Rock and roll youth? Will was stunned. He felt a sense of familiarity with this kind of dressing. The orc girl's mouth was wide open. Obviously, she had recognized who the man and woman were. The orc girl blurted out, "Changing clothes again? No, why are you here? Do you know them?" The Knight of Klein quickly looked at the young orc lady. The orc girl could only nod. "I've met them and received some help from them. This man seems to be a magician." "Magician?" Will couldn't help but be stunned. "Not the kind of performing magician, you know," Klein quickly said, then hesitantly walked in front of the man and woman. The man wearing the rock and roll youth costume. Boss Luo smiled and said, "You seem to need help, right?" Nick stared blankly at the two of them driving the huge modified performance van. How timely. Genius remembered the address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1306. Cool. When the people who were moving things out saw the large modified truck in front of the door, they all opened their mouths in surprise. Klein still felt that it was a bit unbelievable. Although the little orc girl had confirmed that they were people she knew, and they were good people who had helped her before, Klein still felt that this pair of man and woman appeared too timely. Yes, it was too timely. They knew what he needed, and they directly sent almost all the best things to him. The door of the train could automatically open, and the equipment inside was complete. It was enough to support an open-air concert with tens of thousands of people. Even if they wanted to prepare it, it would take a long time. How could they find it so easily? Moreover, it was because I happened to see it on the road, and I thought it might be useful, so I drove it here. Such a reason? Are you two really magicians? Klein calmed down and decided to test the other party's background first. Can you show me the proof from the Magicians Association? Of course, Boss Luo didn't have this kind of thing, but it was just a matter of thought to get such a proof. Of course, there were also those wandering magicians who weren't certified by the Magicians Association. Boss Luo, who had always maintained the good quality of energy saving, decided, "I'm a wandering magician. If you want proof, is this okay?" Unexpectedly, Miss Maid took out a pendant that was hanging on a silver necklace at this time. The pendant was in the shape of two snakes biting each other's tails, and in the middle was a special symbol, gold. Klein stared at the pendant seriously. At first, he was a little confused, then his face began to become confused, as if he was trying hard to remember something. In the end, the black man Neil whispered something directly in his ear, and Knight Klein's face changed slightly. "Your Excellency, I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to come." Not only Klein, but also the black man Nick's attitude changed at this time. "My companion and I just happened to be here for a vacation, and I really don't want to see such a good tourist spot again. I'm looking forward to the next time I come. This place is still as beautiful as ever," Yu Yi said with a smile. Then, Klein and Nick looked at each other and nodded. "Thank you for your help this time. I will definitely report this matter to the Night Division. If possible, can you tell me your name?" "Pansy." She said a name. Klein and Neil remembered this name at the same time. "There's no time to lose. Since there's already one, let's start preparing." Knowing that the current situation did not allow for any delay, Klein quickly informed the two of them and began to prepare the truck that had arrived just in time for the show. Looking at them, the shop owner who was dressed up by the maid asked curiously, "What did you show them?" "It's the Magician Association's secret apothecary certification badge." The maid smiled and said, "In the past, for the convenience of work, I casually got one. Generally speaking, for magicians, especially the secret apothecaries of magicians, in Europe, the inhuman people are more polite." Luaccio nodded and smiled. "Hierarchy system." The maid said softly, "The establishment of the system is more clear here. Sometimes, the proof of identity is more popular than the real strength." Watching Knight Klein and the others start to move things into the truck, Boss Luo asked casually, "Is there any special meaning in using the name Pansy?" The maid smiled and said, "Because when I signed up, I happened to read a fairy tale and didn't want to use my original name. So I used this name from the fairy tale." Luaccio also read this fairy tale when he was a child, so he smiled and said, "A flower that can help people fulfill their wishes. After you became a secret apothecary, you sold a lot of formulas, right?" "Just a little." The maid smiled slightly. While they were talking, a petite figure slowly approached. Her footsteps were a little hesitant, and her expression was a little hesitant. She wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. She looked uneasy. It was the little orc girl, Ellie. "We meet again, Miss Ellie." Luaccio habitually greeted her first. Le nodded and blinked. Like Klein, she also felt that this gentleman's appearance was too timely. Naturally, such a lousy excuse would not be convincing. Thus, she easily found a more suitable excuse. "Have you been following me, Olga and me?" the orc girl asked timidly. Boss Luo asked in a soft voice that could easily lead people astray. "Miss Ellie, are you really going to help Knight Klein?" The question directly pointed to the orc girl's heart, and the degree of priority directly overshadowed the doubts in her heart at this time. She nodded, and her eyes were a little firm. "Our situation is actually not very good. If this matter isn't dealt with properly, I'm afraid that my life will be even more difficult in the future. 30 years ago, there was a riot of beastmen. Because they did some very extreme things, it led to a long period of anti-beastmen upsurge. This time, you want to help them. I want to help them. Even if I have to pay a price?" The little orc girl took a deep breath. "I know that even if this matter is settled, the Night mechanism won't forget this matter so easily. They might even face a rather severe punishment. But if they're not calmed down and are allowed to fight wildly, they will only have one ending, and that is death. And the orcs in the world will also have a more miserable ending because of this. I know, I don't have the right to decide their fate, but at least I don't want to see the worst result. That is, they will die in battle, and all the orcs will bear more infamy because of this." This was almost said in one breath. She was not timid, but firm and straightforward. But the orc girl's momentum did not last until the end. In the end, she became nervous again. Did I say something wrong?" "No." Luaccio shook his head. "I personally prefer this answer. But correspondingly, when they wake up, they may bear a grudge against you. Perhaps after they wake up, they would rather die in battle than accept the so-called punishment. Of course, You can't cover all of them at once. Perhaps some of them will be grateful to you. I'm not afraid. Luaccio smiled slightly. But what you need to do now is not to be afraid, but to protect yourself well. Protect? Miss Ellie was stunned. Boss Luo looked at his servant girl, and the servant girl looked at the orc girl with a faint smile. Miss Ellie, are you planning to appear in front of them like this? Change your clothes. As the servant girl said, she magically took out one piece in each hand, 2 pieces of clothing with different styles, but at the same time, they were quite revealing at a glance. Just like that, they hung down from her hands. After the servant girl finished speaking, she did not wait for the orc girl's response and directly pulled her into the social work center. This don't stop. Probably it's a hobby. Boss Luo looked at the orc girl who was pulled away in a panic with interest and couldn't help but smile. At this time, someone also came to him with hesitant steps. Chung Iran. The movement outside naturally did not escape him. After he came out later, he inquired a little about the 2 new guys from Will, of course, was also confused. He only knew that they seemed to be temporary companions. What's the matter? Luaccio looked at Chung Iran and smiled slightly. Have we met somewhere before? Chung Iran frowned and asked. Maybe, Luaccio said softly and then nodded. I'll see if they need help. You'll also help, right? Chung Iran nodded subconsciously. In the dressing room, the orc girl's petite figure was now curled up in the corner. She was completely hidden from the servant girl. She covered her shoulders with both hands. Her top had disappeared somehow, leaving only the white underwear that was slightly raised. Her smooth lower abdomen obviously did not have any excess fat. In addition, her skin was slightly dark, but it was a very healthy color. It was like a shiny black pearl. Which one is better to wear? The servant girl did not seem to be much different from most of the women standing in front of the fitting mirror at this time. Neither is good, she said with a trembling voice. The strange sailor suit she wore last time was still fresh in her memory, but she could still wear it, but the 2 in front of her were too shameful. Looking at the servant girl who seemed to have chosen, the orc girl suddenly had an impulse to rush out and fight with the orc instead of staying here. No! In the warehouse of the building, the sound of an explosion sounded instantly. The door of the cargo room was directly blown up. A berserk orc flew out of the fire. Its body was full of crisscrossing wounds, as if it had been injured by a sharp weapon. In the fire of the door, a man walked out slowly with a sword. At this moment, even the berserk orcs seemed to be hiding a trace of fear under their ruthless gazes. Orcs are the root of all evils. The man raised a long sword in his hand, the demon sword. The scarlet lines like flowing blood were shining on the blade at this time. At this moment, the orc roared angrily. With its powerful strength and the effect of berserk, it jumped up again and pounced on the man. Like a flash of black lightning, when the orc landed on the ground, its limbs had been cut off. Only the orc, who could still move, seemed to have finally woken up from the state of berserk. Its solid muscles began to shrink, and its body began to shrink. Obviously, when it completely recovered, it was only a very thin old man. But before he could say a word, the black light flashed before his eyes. The last thing he saw was the orc's body with its limbs cut off. With a wave of the demon's sword, blood splashed out and scattered on the ground. The man turned to another direction. From the beginning to the end, there was nothing but disgust in his eyes. The fire in the city didn't seem to show any signs of slowing down. Finally, with the magic sword in hand, he quickly found a new target. A guy was climbing on top of a building and constantly roaring, completely treating the city like a primeval forest. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the demon's sword in his hand emitted a dark red luster. The truth is that the world has quieted down. With the help of the demon's sword, he jumped up from the ground and ran on the outer wall of the building. At an extremely fast speed, he rushed to the orc and slashed down with the demon's sword. The orc didn't even have time to react. Its head was separated from its body and fell to the ground. At this time, the man grabbed the broken glass window of the building with one hand and looked at the street below, looking for his next target. In the darkness of the night, the dark river surged violently. On the riverbed of the Thames, A small boat was slowly moving toward the foggy harbor, which was illuminated by the light of the fire. On the ship, there was a group of people wearing black cloaks and hoods that covered their faces. One of them was standing at the bow of the boat, looking at the chaotic and burning city with a telescope. At this time, a little bird emitting a faint light flew over from the night sky. The little bird seemed to be made of light and was very beautiful. Finally, it landed on the shoulder of the cloaked person standing at the bow of the boat and called softly. As it started, it was a man with a deep voice who shouldn't be too young. At this time, a person wearing the same clothes walked up from behind. "Mr. Ace, do we need to log in now?" The man on the bow, Mr. Ace, reached out to play with the light bird on his shoulder and chuckled. "Don't worry. Our employer hasn't given us any instructions yet, right? But I'm starting to admire this employer. He's really patient." "Indeed," the man behind him agreed, and then suddenly asked, "Sir, this time our Magician Association dispatched so many elites, but isn't the reward a little? Don't just look at the little wealth on the books." Mr. Ace said indifferently, "Those tower masters value the promises under the books." "Promises? What promises?" However, Mr. Ace acted as if he didn't hear his subordinate's question and continued to focus on teasing the light bird on his shoulder. The subordinate didn't ask any more questions at this time and then respectfully retreated. Mr. Ace continued to look at the famous city ahead and suddenly muttered in a low voice, "It's really a night mechanism full of disasters." There seemed to be a thump, thump, thump sound in her ears. When Miss Orc awkwardly walked out of the changing room of the social work center and appeared in front of everyone, two members of the punk band whistled directly to express her skinny figure at this time. The girl's slender body was wearing leather boots. The high-slit tights only covered the private part below her lower abdomen and upward. The mature, smoky makeup on her face completely covered the girl's original immaturity. The oncoming dusty air almost made the two men a little unable to control their guns. At this time, the orc girl could only helplessly reach down with one hand and try to cover her legs as much as possible. At the same time, the other hand only covered a small part of her soft chest. At this time, the maid suddenly pushed the orc girl's back mischievously. "You can debut now." The little girl staggered. Her agile body was so stiff that she didn't know what to do. She fell to the ground. Oh, it turned out that there was a good space reserved for her slightly raised buttocks. Her tail swayed slightly in the air. "No, don't look." Chapter 1307. The Fianna Headquarters. The fighter jet used for the expedition had crashed, and there were only a few survivors left in the entire team. In the end, they still completed the final mission and brought back the information of the battle between the 12 Knights of the Round Table and Oberon. After taking off the dragon cavalry armor, the survivors looked terrified, as if they were about to collapse. They let the staff begin to adjust the cabin and carry out the post-war rest. In fact, although they were able to return this time, their data had reached the dangerous warning line. If they didn't adjust in time, they would not be any better than the other members who had died. The survivors slowly closed their eyes. As for what the future would be, they didn't want to care about it anymore. They just lacked actual combat experience. In the control room, looking at the survivors who entered the adjustment cabin, the Prime Minister gave such a reason. He had even recovered from the blow of the failure of this operation and encouraged the people here. Although our operation this time has failed, the data obtained is also incomparably precious. This has made us realize the shortcomings of the Dragon Knights and the shortcomings of the pilots. In the future, this is the direction we will take to conquer this. We have reached the inhuman realm in terms of strength. What we lack is something else. Technology, more data, and fighting spirit. Such words were better than nothing. People were used to looking for a reason that could make failure not sad. The Prime Minister didn't stay in the control room for too long. After a few simple words, he left under the escort of the officer. There were too many things that would give him a headache, such as how to deal with the cabinet ministers and how to deploy the military. After that, he still needed to negotiate with the Night Division. Finally, he even had to deal with the impact of the riot in Fog City and rebuild. The Prime Minister even had a feeling that in the next 6 months, he might not even be able to get a half-day holiday. Prepare a helicopter for me. At this time, the Prime Minister ordered the officer accompanying him. After we get on the plane, give me another impromptu video conference. It's almost time to brush off those old fogies in the cabinet. Also, connect me to the military now. I want to know the current evacuation progress. The Prime Minister paused, as if there were more orders. He was sorting out his thoughts at this time, so he muttered, but the officer beside him didn't do anything at this time. He couldn't help but frown. Didn't you hear what I said? I told you to connect me to the military immediately. Are you so frightened by the commotion outside that you can't think straight? I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, but you no longer have the authority to order me around, the officer said calmly. What nonsense are you talking about? The officer smiled. Because you have been temporarily suspended from your position as Prime Minister. I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister. You are now suspected of shifting government funds, colluding with foreign inhumans, and even planning to kidnap the Queen. So, I need to arrest you now. What did you say? The Prime Minister looked at his confidant in disbelief. You arrested me. Who gave you the authority? I'm sure Sir Hopkins will be willing to answer that question when you see him. Putin, the officer didn't say anything else. Instead, before the Prime Minister could react, he rushed up and knocked him out. This sudden turn of events terrified the two bodyguards beside the Prime Minister. But before they could draw their pistols, the officer had already knocked them to the ground at lightning speed. As for the escorts who had come out from the base, they were stunned on the spot. Operate as usual here. Wait for my return. The officer looked at the staff in front of him and slowly ordered. On the long street, there were at least 5 violent orcs. 2 of them were even holding onto residents who were on the verge of death. Mr. Gareth had to be very careful, lest the aftermath of the battle would cause these hostages whose lives were in danger. If he was facing these orcs alone, he naturally wouldn't have so many scruples. After besieging the leader of the myths of Doomsday, Oberon, except for Geraint, who could only rest at the moment due to excessive consumption, the other 4 still maintained considerable combat power. Therefore, after leaving the monastery, they were immediately dispatched to the major streets of Fog City to begin suppressing the orc riots. At this time, a few cold lights flashed in the air, and then Mr. Clown hurried through the buildings. Mr. Gareth couldn't help but be shocked. He was afraid that this guy wouldn't hold back at all and hurt the 2 residents who were on the verge of death. Dagonite, don't mess around. However, at this time, the flying daggers easily pierced the shoulder joints of these orcs. The hostages were able to escape at once. Several elite knights, who were always ready, rushed out in an instant and directly rescued the hostages. Then Mr. Clown directly knocked these orcs to the ground with the speed of a gust of wind sweeping the fallen leaves. The rioting orcs fell under him, and then the flying daggers returned to his fingers. Mr. Clown's face was full of tears. I say, Gareth, can you have a little more confidence in me? I'm a person who made a knight's oath in front of King Arthur's statue. Mr. Gareth couldn't help but roll his eyes. He didn't have time to pay attention to this guy. He hurriedly ordered the elite knights to bring back the knocked-down orcs. The orcs' frenzy hadn't been removed, but they had been imprisoned by the elite knights with special binding props. They had completely lost the ability to move and could only make meaningless noises. They are all residents with legal identities, but they were bewitched. At this time, Mr. Gareth ordered the elite knights to put the blanketed orcs on a transport vehicle. Take good care of them after bringing them back. We need to find a way to stop their madness. If they really can't calm down, I suggest you use tranquilizers. Yes, the knights began to get busy. Naturally, there were more than a few orcs who had just been knocked down by Mr. Clown on the transport vehicle. Originally, there were already more than 20 orcs lying on the vehicle. Gareth, I'll leave first to clear the area. I'll leave these troublesome matters to you. After Mr. Clown said his farewells, he ran away on the long street. Gareth was a little helpless, but speaking of which, perhaps he was really born to deal with such trivial matters. In fact, it didn't take too much time to load the vehicles. The key was that the vehicles were already full. They needed to transport these orcs back. Gareth didn't feel at ease letting the knights be responsible for the transport, because he didn't know where the group of mythology of Doomsday thugs were hiding in the Fog City. Mr. Gareth, maybe I can help you. In a dark alley, a man was dragging a heavily injured orc out. Gareth looked at him and was a little surprised. He then nodded and said, "So it's you, Mr. Simpton." Head Knight Simpton threw the heavily injured orc on the ground. Afterward, someone immediately restrained this orc and pushed it onto the transport vehicle. Simpton said with a serious face, "Leave the transport to me. You guys are more efficient than us in suppressing the orcs. We need to quell the chaos in the Fog City as soon as possible." Gareth couldn't disagree with him. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded and said, "Okay then, I'll leave the transport to you, Head Knight Simpton." "As you wish, the great Head Knight Gareth." Simpton bowed to him as a junior knight greeting a senior knight. "Oh, you're too cautious. Mr. Simpton, relax." Gareth patted him on the shoulder. "We are comrades, not subordinates. Then I'll go first." Head Knight Simpton nodded. "I'll come out as soon as I'm done. I'll wait for your good news." After he said that, he directly walked onto the transport vehicle. Gareth watched the transport vehicle leave and began to focus again. Although he still had a lot of energy left, too many things had happened since Farrell broke out of prison last night and the chaos in the Fog City tonight. He was starting to feel tired. Suddenly, he felt a slight wetness on his finger. He looked down and realized there was a trace of blood on his finger. It was still fresh. He rubbed the blood with his finger and looked at the transport vehicle leaving. Maybe he was just overthinking. Gareth shook his head, but he still moved and walked towards the alley where Simpton came from. He smelled a strong smell of blood. Gareth frowned and raised his hand. A ball of light appeared on his palm along with an ancient language. It was the language of the elves that only the 12 knights could use. The light's source instantly lit up the dark alley. There was a long trail of blood on the ground. It was an injured body that was forcefully dragged on the ground. It was probably the orc that Simpton brought out. He slowly walked forward along the trail of blood. He felt like there was something in front of him. Finally, he stopped in front of a door. It seemed to be the back door of a restaurant. The door was unlocked. The trail of blood also started here. Gareth gently pushed the door open and walked in. After a few seconds, he suddenly narrowed his eyes. In front of him, in front of the restaurant, he saw orcs kneeling on the ground with wounds all over their bodies. They had already gone through extreme punishment. They had already become cold corpses. The corpses were kneeling on the ground in a posture of repentance. The floor was covered in thick, scarlet blood. It was like a slaughterhouse. Garrett's expression suddenly changed. Sir Perkins' manner. In Sir Hopkins' private office. Sir Hopkins sat quietly like this, waiting for something. On the opposite side of the office desk, a middle-aged man with slightly bald hair was sitting with his head half tilted. His head was hanging down. Maybe he had been like this for some time. The man who was sitting with his head tilted suddenly woke up and then raised his head in a panic. "You actually betrayed. It's you, Hopkins." The one who came to his senses was the Prime Minister of the British government. When he saw his enemy, the Prime Minister looked around frantically. This was a completely unfamiliar place to him, but he knew where this place was because he had seen it in the intelligence reports. "Mr. Prime Minister, you should be very familiar with the environment here." Sir Hopkins smiled and said, "Because I think, on your desk, there must be a very detailed intelligence report about this place, right?" "Hopkins." The Prime Minister suddenly stood up and pressed his hands on the desk. He glared at the other party. "You dare to lynch me? Do you know what you're doing?" Sir Hopkins waved his hand casually. "I know very well what I am doing, Mr. Prime Minister. Why don't you also listen to what I know? What do you want to do?" The Prime Minister instantly calmed down and at the same time quickly sorted out the information he had. He was silent and sat down again. Sir Hopkins said slowly, "You want to deal with the night mechanism, right?" The Prime Minister sneered and said nothing. Sir Hopkins continued, "Every year, a large amount of money flows to your secret base. Over the years, you have created a total of 23 dragon riders and named them the Fianna, the Fenian warriors in Celtic mythology. You think this group of warriors can be compared to our Knights of the Round Table. In fact, I really admire your efforts from the bottom of my heart. After all, You have used your own efforts to prove that ordinary people can also set foot in the inhuman realm. The Prime Minister sneered. I am not surprised at all that you would take out all the information about the research results at this time. I really didn't expect that the person I thought highly of would betray me. Sir Hopkins shook his head. His name is Orphan. In fact, he is my adopted son and also a knight of our knight mechanism. He has never been your subordinate, my Prime Minister. Good, very good. The Prime Minister gritted his teeth and was so angry that he couldn't say anything. Continue? Sir Hopkins leaned back in his seat. You quickly thought of a plan. You funded a mob organization. This organization is called the Myth of Doomsday, right? In a few years, you have provided a lot of activity funds to this organization, right? In addition, you also secretly bought some equipment from the Magician Association and then gave it to them. Of course, this organization didn't waste your resources in vain. The Fianna seems to have several technologies that were seized from other places through this organization, right? Let me think, last year, there was a batch of stolen aerospace materials in the United States, and it seemed to be your handiwork? Ridiculous. A one-sided story. The Prime Minister snorted. Later, you felt that the time was right. Sir Hopkins still said calmly, you felt that you shouldn't have anything to do with this organization anymore because it would affect your future career. It just so happened that our Crown Prince seemed to have really lost his patience. He didn't want to wait any longer. After all, he was almost 70 years old. A 70-year-old Crown Prince is indeed too long of a wait. The Prime Minister's face finally changed slightly. Sir Hopkins said indifferently, you let the people of the Myth of Doomsday kidnap the Queen and declare war on the British government. You have a very good reason to use the Fianna. You can use the Fianna. Not only will this incident uproot the organization you funded, but perhaps our Queen will also die in this kidnapping due to an unfortunate accident. Let me think. When everything is over, it should be time for the Crown Prince to ascend to the throne, right? Then, as the Knight organization that did nothing in the matter of the Queen being kidnapped by an inhuman, it will become a role to be impeached by the cabinet. Perhaps the Fianna has the possibility of replacing the Knight organization. Oh, there's one more thing. You probably didn't expect that the people of the Myth of Doomsday would actually directly ask the British government for the independence of the entire Northern Ireland region. This part is slightly beyond your control. Looking at the Prime Minister's ugly expression, Sir Hopkins smiled. That's about it. Do you have anything to add? Yes. The Prime Minister sneered at this time. Then you seem to have forgotten to search me. Hopkins, you shouldn't have seen me alone. Suddenly, the Prime Minister lifted his clothes and pulled out an antique bronze pistol. He pointed the muzzle at the other party and smiled grimly. Just a light touch, and the result will be the same. Goodbye, my good friend. Bang! Without leaving any time for Sir Hopkins to react, the Prime Minister pulled the trigger on this special gun. The whistling bullet stopped in front of Sir Hopkins at this moment, as if there was something blocking it and imprisoning it. The Prime Minister shot continuously in horror, but the bullets were stopped in front of Sir Hopkins one by one, until all the bullets were fired. The power is not bad. It's a new toy made by the Magician Association this year. The Prime Minister retreated in horror. Suddenly, he turned around and rushed out of the door recklessly. Sir Hopkins had no intention of stopping him. He just watched as the Prime Minister hurriedly opened the office door and rushed out. Then, step by step, he retreated back again. At this time, the Prime Minister's expression was so panicked. As he retreated step by step, he finally understood one thing. He squeezed out a voice and said with difficulty, Oberon, it's you. How could? In front of the door, Caesar. He walked in step by step with no expression on his face. Hashtag, 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 hashtag PS. The next chapter will be later. Scroll top, load next chapter S. Chapter 1308. The truck was almost ready. But Miss Orc wrapped herself in a blanket and curled up in a corner. She felt that her purity had been tarnished by their gazes. She felt that she might get pregnant if they stared at her more. Do you want to drink something? You'll feel better when you're nervous. Boss Luo walked over with a cup of hot cocoa. Of course, I'm not that good at cooking. It was a ready-made brew in the social work center. As for Miss Maid, She left alone after dressing up as an orc girl. As for whether it was Miss Maid's intention or Luacio's order, no one knew, and no one was stupid enough to ask. Although he had received help from the other party, he had never let his guard down. In fact, both Klein and Neil had been quietly observing his actions. "Thank you." The orc girl stretched out her hand from the blanket and took the warm cup, but she still tightly covered herself with the blanket, afraid that she would expose anything. Without this person's order, Miss Maid wouldn't be like this. Is she really interested in this? Luacio sat down beside her, and the orc girl drank her hot cocoa silently. She wasn't like this before, Luacio suddenly said. Leo was startled and subconsciously turned to look at the side of her boss' face. Boss Luo looked at Will and the others who were busy outside the gate and said gently, "You won't have too much communication with people like this, and there won't be many things that you're interested in. Probably you've experienced a stage where you're interested in everything and then lose interest. Later on, these things slowly came back. Don't mind it. This is actually her way of showing that she is willing to interact with people." "Is she sick?" Lale asked subconsciously. Luacio just smiled and looked at the orc girl. Suddenly, he flipped his hand. In his palm, a clown mask appeared out of thin air. "I'll lend this to you, temporarily." "What's this?" Lale took the clown mask with a puzzled expression. Luacio said, "I call it false mask. I used it for a while, but I didn't need it later. Actually, it doesn't look like a clown. It doesn't have a fixed appearance. It can be changed according to your thoughts. Why don't you give it a try?" The little orc girl nodded obediently and put the mask on her face. Strangely, the mask seemed to have turned into a flowing liquid and attached itself to her face like a thin film. It was very comfortable. In the end, it turned into a silver eye patch, covering the little girl's eyes and the bridge of her nose. An ordinary mirror suddenly appeared in front of her. The little orc girl, who was used to the other party's tricks, looked at the new form on the mirror and couldn't help but click her tongue in wonder. "Is this a magic conductor?" she asked in surprise as she touched the blindfold on her face. "It's just a little trinket." Luacio smiled and said, "When I don't want to appear in front of people I know, I choose to wear it." The little orc girl knew what she needed to do next, so she understood the convenience that the mask brought her. Because of this, although she was very embarrassed, her body still accepted the maid's disguise. "It feels like I'm a different person," Lale muttered to herself. Luacio suddenly said softly, "Sometimes, no matter whether we put on the mask or take it off, we're still a different person." Lale was enlightened. She suddenly looked up and asked, "Do you want to hear a story?" "Actually, I like to listen to stories the most." Luacio's smile became more beautiful. The skin covered by the eye mask had some heat. The little orc girl's amber eyes glowed. "A long, long time ago, there was a little girl. Speaking of this, the little orc girl seemed a little uneasy. I'm not good at telling stories. Will the beginning be very cliché? What happened to the little girl later?" Luacio asked curiously. Lil calmed herself down. She couldn't hear the other person's heartbeat like Klein and Will. However, there was something that made her feel more at ease. Her intuition told her that the other person wasn't impatient at all. Instead, the other person treated her very gently. Since she was born, she rarely woke up. Lael said slowly, because she was placed in an ice coffin since she was young. The only person who accompanied her was her brother. "Ice coffin?" "Yes, ice coffin." Lael nodded. Since the siblings were born, they couldn't stay in the outside world for a long time because of their congenital defects. This pair of siblings were actually born on the same day. When they were born, their mother had suffered a very serious injury. "Their mother?" Lael lowered her head and said, "Their mother insisted on giving birth to them and then left this world. In the end, their father had no choice but to place them in the ice coffin and find a way to treat them. Because he had to find a way to treat them, their father had no choice but to leave often. Since they were very, very young, the little girl consciously recorded the number of times she met her father. There were only 8 times. Every time, to the little girl and her little brother, it could be said to be the happiest thing, because every time they slept in the ice coffin, it could be a few months, or it could be a few years, and the time they spent with their father was only a few short days. Just like this, time passed little by little, Finally, one day, the siblings woke up from the ice coffin again. At this time, they almost couldn't feel the pain caused by their birth defects. They suddenly had a feeling that perhaps they had already recovered. They hugged each other and cried. They desperately wanted to see their father, who had healed them. But what frightened them was that after they woke up this time, they didn't see their father again. They searched every place where they lived, but they still couldn't find any clues about their father. Just like this, they waited at the original place for a year. Finally, the resources that were used up. They discussed and decided to leave temporarily. They started to walk with difficulty and stopped from time to time. Along the way, they kept asking about their father. They also gradually met some of their own kind. Their own kind taught them how to survive, how to hide themselves, and how to protect themselves. But my sister was actually a very rude and stupid person. The little girl glanced at Boss Luo subconsciously. Luocio just blinked and let her continue. The little orc girl wrapped the blanket tighter. Once, because of impulsiveness, my sister accidentally hurt a few people. Those people were the descendants of rich families in that place. The siblings met their own kind and advised them to leave. The siblings didn't want to implicate their own kind, so they had to choose to leave the place where they lived for a few months temporarily. They continued to walk. At this time, my brother suddenly remembered a place. At that time, every time my father came back, he would take them to that place. They searched according to their vague memories. In the end, they successfully found that place. But that place was different. The surrounding environment was different, and it became a very big farm. They didn't want to leave like this. They thought that maybe there would be a day when their father would come back. So, they quietly stayed there. This time, my sister learned to be smarter. She no longer argued with others and started to contact the farm workers. Gradually, the farm workers started to communicate with the siblings. They were all good people. They were very enthusiastic to help the siblings. Not only did they take them in, but they were also willing to let them stay to help with some things that they could do. In addition, they were also paid. She had a look of reminiscence on her face. Every day, they helped to weed and feed the poultry. After a day of work, they would gather in front of a very big table to eat and chat. The uncle in charge of driving the tractor was very good at singing, and the aunt who cooked was a person who liked to dance. The smell of hops was very fragrant, but my sister still liked milk tea, and my brother liked the taste of cream soup. Clouds, grass, farm, day by day, day by day. Father still didn't appear. Unfortunately, something unfortunate still happened. It happened in the middle of the night. A group of people suddenly came to the farm. They rushed into the farm and kept smashing everything around. Those uncles and aunts, brothers and sisters who were very good to the siblings, were screaming in fear. The little girl grabbed her shoulders with both hands, and the blanket fell from her shoulders, which were not very wide. The girl saw an older sister being dragged into the house by the robbers. The older sister was crying in pain. She could only hug her brother tightly and hide in the straw shed, not daring to make any sound. But at this time, the kind farm owner who was very good to the siblings' chest was directly pierced through, and the farm owner's child, who was a few years old. The child was lifted up high by them, as if they were going to throw the child down. Throw the child down. They laughed crazily, as if they were crazy, as if they were demons. The girl rushed out. She rushed out recklessly, rushed out. She didn't realize what she had done. She also seemed to be crazy. The little orc girl's lips were slightly pale. I don't know how much time had passed. It seemed like a few years. The girl woke up. What terrified her was that she was surrounded by corpses. The corpses of the bandits. Their bodies were torn apart. Their arms, legs, heads, they were everywhere. Her body, her face, her favorite dress, they were all covered in blood. Blood. Uncle and aunts looked at the little girl with more fear than when they saw the robbers. She understood that she had made a mistake again. Will she regret it? Luocio suddenly interrupted softly. I'm asking about the little girl. No. Lael shook his head. Not at all. But she still left with her brother. Because everything had changed. She knew that dinner was gone. The time to chat, tell stories, sing songs, and watch TV together was gone. Want to go back? Want to go back, but don't dare to go back. Lael smiled bitterly. In the following period of time, the siblings began to wander outside, continuing to inquire about their father's news. About half a year later, the siblings made a decision. They decided to go to their mother's hometown to take a look. Because when they were young, they had heard their father mention where their mother's hometown was, and they remembered it. A group of people appeared, saying that they could bring them to a place, but they didn't expect that this group of people turned out to be a group of hateful human traffickers. The little orc girl smiled bitterly. They were locked up on a ship in darkness. This stupid sister made a mistake again. Is she really stupid? Luaccio thought for a while, then said softly, "We can't ask her to do more things, and we can't give her any help. Naturally, we can't and don't have the right to judge her. Is she tired?" She didn't speak, pursing her lips tightly, raised her head, and kept moving her delicate amber eyes, watery, shaking her head, shaking her head. "This story, is it very boring?" Luaccio shook his head and said, "I think if someone is willing to tell me a story, then it would be a very happy thing. No matter how long it is, no matter how familiar it seems, sad, happy. To me, it's something that I can do for a lifetime. So, if there's a continuation to this story, I'll be happy to listen to it." The little orc girl lowered her head and said weakly, "Don't you already know the rest?" Luaccio smiled, then reached out and wrapped the blanket that the little orc girl loosened in excitement again. "But there are also things that will happen in the future, right?" "Future?" She looked at Luaccio in a daze. The face in front of her, she felt as if she was seeing her father in a dream. It was a stable feeling. This person, maybe her little heart, started to tremble. Suddenly, "Ready!" Klein's voice could be heard shouting loudly. The little orc girl suddenly stood up. The blanket slid down from her body, revealing the rather revealing high-slit leather coat again. She took a deep breath. I'm going." Then she walked over stiffly, step by step, looking a little funny. Luaccio smiled, then put away the blanket on the ground. At this time, a small figure came in front of him. It was the rather delicate Olga. "Thank you." The little orc boy timidly looked up at Luaccio, who was 2 heads taller than him. Boss Luo chose to bend down, reached out, and patted his head, looked into his eyes, and said, "You have a very strong sister." Olga's face was slightly red. Then he quickly said, "My sister is still growing. Don't worry. Her body will be very good in the future. Wearing those clothes, she'll look better." Olga turned around and left. "My biological brother. Hashtag, 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 hashtag PS. 8/30. Chapter 1309. Will wiped his sweat after moving the last battery into the truck. But his partner was still adjusting the audio equipment in the truck. This part of the adjustment should be completed soon. Chung Iran was sitting in the corner of the container. Will walked over curiously and saw that he was holding a guitar in one hand and a mobile phone in the other. As he listened, he would pluck the strings of the guitar a few times. "Chung, what are you doing? You're still composing at this time?" Will was surprised. Although Will couldn't call himself a musician, as a fan of rock music, he could tell what Chung Yiran was doing. Chung Yiran nodded and stretched out his phone, signaling Will to listen to the voice. Will took the phone and listened for a while out of curiosity. "This is Moon Contract." Will quickly recognized the origin of the sound. It was the song that the little orc girl sang for sacrifice. In fact, rather than a song, it was more like an ode. It was just that the pronunciation leaned towards the scale, so it sounded more like some kind of ballad. However, if one listened to it in its entirety, they would find that it was more like a recitation. This must have been secretly recorded by Chung Iran. Will thought. At first, Klein and Nick didn't think that the little orc girl would be very useful when she calmed down the berserk orc. So, they tried a few times and found that the Moon Contract was really useful. Then, they started to carry out this plan. "It'll be chaotic if there are too many people." Chung Iran smiled. "So, I decided to do something else. Just think of it as me being bored." At this time, Klein came over and said that everything was ready and they could start. After a while, the little orc girl appeared in front of everyone again. In front of the truck, Boss Luo, dressed as a rock youth, slowly walked over with a box of mineral water in his hand. Nick, who was standing in front of the door, was stunned. It seemed that everything was ready, but he didn't think about drinking water. After all, this wasn't an outing. After all, it's not a movie. It's impossible to be thirsty after a few hours of activity. Luaccio smiled casually. The black man was silent. After a while, he licked his dry lips and suddenly asked, "How's your driving skill?" Luaccio looked at the big truck. Although he was the one who drove it, it was only in the first gear. It was moving slowly and the journey was short. It would probably be interesting to drive this thing through the streets of the city. Thinking that it might be helpful to try something new, Luaccio smiled and said, "I'll try my best." "Well, I'll leave it to you." Nick nodded. "Maybe I can make room for you. If it's only Klein, it might be a little difficult." He needed to be in charge of defense with Klein. At least, before the Little Orc Girl song took effect, the Berserk Orcs would still be able to move for a short period of time. Although the truck was modified, it was obvious that its iron sheet couldn't withstand the attack of the Berserk Orcs. Luaccio sat in the driver's seat and put his hands on the steering wheel. He suddenly thought that if Zyling sat in this seat, she would probably be very excited. At this time, Nick also sat in the passenger's seat and looked at this young man worriedly. He looked like a newbie who had just gotten his driver's license. He couldn't help but worry a little. Was this person really okay? "Well, where should we go, Mr. Nick?" "Here." Nick quickly connected his phone to the car's navigation system and pointed at a red spot on the electronic map. "This is the nearest battle point to us. Our team of knights is suppressing 4 Berserk Orcs here." "Here." "Okay." Boss Luo nodded. Zyling's driving skills downloaded. Download successful. Installation successful. The truck started very slowly, then it got faster and faster. Finally, it didn't intend to slow down at the crossroad. The black man's fingers couldn't help but tremble. He subconsciously grasped the armrest and widened his eyes. Then, at the exit of the crossroad, the big truck suddenly swung its tail, moved smoothly, turned, and continued to accelerate. Wasn't she trying too hard? The black man opened his mouth slightly. The truck drifted. Boss Luo, who had both hands on the steering wheel, was also a little surprised. That woman at home, how much driving skills did she usually seal away? Fog City was very big. The orcs living here were scattered everywhere. Even the 12 knights couldn't suppress all the orcs. They could only suppress them one by one, especially a few important points that needed the 12 knights to guard. If a Berserk Orc went crazy in the crowd, the casualties would increase exponentially. So, only 3 of the 12 knights were really mobile. The rest were led by the Grand Knights of the Knight organization to carry out the task. In fact, some of the small squads only had one team of elite knights to face the difficulties head-on. In front of the supermarket, a team of 5 elite knights bid a hard bone. They didn't know why 4 Berserk Orcs gathered in front of the supermarket. There were even trapped supermarket employees inside. They had to be in a stalemate with the 4 Berserk Orcs here for a long time, but they still couldn't suppress them successfully. "Damn it, these guys have endless stamina. Cover me and try to sprint again. This time, we have to kill one as soon as possible, or our stamina will be exhausted." Seeing that one of the Berserk Orcs was holding a huge machete. This orc was in charge of the meat stall in the supermarket. Although this kind of machete couldn't be compared to the weapons of the knights, but with the support of the orc's violent strength, its power was very shocking. Even if it wasn't used to chop people, it could easily break a person's bones if it was used to slap them. Roar! The orc holding a machete rushed out from inside, and the huge machete slashed down. The sprinting elite knight narrowly dodged it, but the road was directly cut open by the other party's machete. Under such an impact, the machete didn't break, and there wasn't even a dent. "I knew it. This isn't an ordinary tool. This guy must have hidden a weapon." The losing elite knight couldn't help but say bitterly. At this moment, the orc with the huge machete suddenly began to shout. At the same time, the other orcs in the supermarket rushed out at the same time. Although they were still as berserk as before, they seemed to have some kind of cooperation. Warrior level. This guy is a warrior level orc. We're in trouble this time. The elite knight squad was shocked. A warrior-level berserk orc wasn't something that a squad of elite knights could handle, not to mention that there were other berserk orcs around him. We must hold on. I received a signal for backup. He said he'll be here soon. An elite knight looked at the internal communication device of the knight's mechanism in surprise. He'll be here soon. How soon? He'll be here soon. Boom, 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 boom. The ear-piercing sound of a trumpet suddenly rang out at this time. They saw a huge object moving rapidly in the dazzling light source. Now, a few elite knights were dumbfounded as they stared at a huge modified truck full of graffiti. At this moment, it was speeding down the long street, and it had no intention of slowing down at all. Finally, the sound of emergency brakes sounded crazily, and on the road, black friction marks appeared on the tires. The steering wheel of the big truck suddenly turned, and the front of the truck seemed to be separated from the body of the truck. At this moment, the whole big truck moved diagonally, and the rear half of the container directly crashed into the berserk orc with the machete. The huge impact directly knocked this warrior-level orc into the air and smashed into the supermarket signboard. The elite knights instantly opened their mouths wide. In the car, Mr. Nick grabbed the edge of the window with both hands and slowly turned his neck stiffly to look at the driver beside him. The driver, Boss Luo, released his hand from the steering wheel and said thoughtfully, No wonder she likes to race. It's quite interesting. Mr. Nick, are you okay? No, I'm fine. The black man showed a smile that wasn't too bad, and then directly pushed open the door and climbed out of the car with weak legs. In the container at the back, everyone was squeezed together in a mess, and they all saw stars. You're the backup one-eyed Nick? You were the one who contacted me just now? An elite knight recognized the black man who got out of the car. Nick nodded, then covered his mouth as if he was forcefully swallowing something. Then, he took a deep breath and knocked on the container forcefully. At this moment, a gap opened on the top of the container, and then a lift platform slowly lifted the orc lady who was covered with a tablecloth. The tablecloth was like a cloak, fluttering in the wind. The knights looked at this small figure with a silver-eye mask and couldn't help but frown. They didn't know what one-eyed Nick wanted to do. At the same time, the four corners of the container began to open, and a few loudspeakers were quickly pushed out. Finally, the orc lady who had completely risen to the top of the container suddenly untied the cloak on her body. She looked around coldly. Then she directly squatted down and retched. The scene suddenly changed. It seems that I went a bit overboard. Boss Luo had just unscrewed the cap of the mineral water and was about to drink some water to calm himself down, and then directly put down the mineral water. Nick, what are you doing? This is your support? Are you here to be funny? The knights were instantly furious. The battlefield isn't a place for you to play. Seeing the orc warlord who was slammed into the supermarket by the large truck shake his head, shake off the dizziness, and land again, regroup, and begin to command the other 3 berserk orcs to attack, the knights couldn't help but be secretly anxious. They saw Klein open the container door and then jump to the top of the container. With a war hammer in his hand, he directly guarded the orc lady's side and then nodded at the orc lady. The little orc girl, who had recovered, took a deep breath at this time, then held the microphone with both hands and opened her mouth slightly. In the container, Chung Iran and the others wore headphones, and their fingers were placed on the mixer, ready at any time. Nick, stop playing. Klein, I recognize you. Even if you're a Mr. Garrett student, you can't mess around. Hurry up and come down. Let's get into formation and knock down the orc warlord first. Klein raised a shield and warhammer at the same time, then banged hard to attract the attention of the orc warlord. Damn it, this reckless young man. The knights gritted their teeth and were about to rush forward with their swords. At this time, the loudspeakers at the 4 corners of the container suddenly emitted a harsh sound of electric current. After that, the surroundings suddenly quieted down. Lil began to sing slowly. Just like that, the children sleep peacefully, sighing about the sparkling sparks in the ashes, 1, 2, floating bubbles, admiring faces. The orc warlord raised the machete in his hand and let out a loud roar. Like a beast that had been freed from its cage, his scarlet eyes were wide open. He led the three berserk orcs, gritted his teeth, and walked towards her step by step. Her voice started to tremble, and her hand that was holding the microphone started to tremble. She didn't dare to look at these orcs from the corner of her eyes, and subconsciously looked away. Finally, her amber eyes found a place that made her feel at ease. She met Loachio's gaze. He smiled and encouraged her. She gripped the microphone tightly with both hands and finally met the scarlet eyes of the several berserk orcs again. Her voice began to calm down. Thousands of dreams hanging on the earth. In the night of the swaying silver pupils, the resplendent you are born, their footsteps began to become hesitant. The three berserk orcs behind the warlord held their heads, appearing to be in pain as they let out sorrowful cries. Holding the machete, he was still struggling, and his ferocious nature was roaring at this time. Her singing voice was like gentle hands, and the singing girl seemed to be hugging each of them. Even if hundreds of millions of years have turned countless prayers to dust, I'll still continue to pray. Please be sure to leave hickeys on these children's loving hands, she sang over and over again. The orc warlord's eyes had dimmed at some point, and the scarlet color faded. The huge machete in his hand also fell from his hand. Their heads hung low as they stood motionless in place, as if they had fallen asleep amid the singing. It's really stopped. The knights subconsciously put down the weapons in their hands and watched this scene in disbelief. I'll still continue to pray. Please be sure to leave hickeys on these children's loving hands. The singing continued. Hashtag, 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 hashtag PS. The next chapter will be later. Genius remembers this site's address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1310. The voice gradually became softer. Inside the container, everyone began to adjust the volume. It was more like a whisper, like a mother's lullaby. Seeing this, Klein jumped down from the container gently, and then carefully approached the orc warrior with Nick. Finally, the two of them successfully arrived in front of the orc warrior without the orc warrior resisting. The two of them looked at each other, then quickly took out restraining tools and directly locked the orc warrior's hands and feet. From the beginning to the end, the orc warrior seemed to be half awake, until the two of them did the same thing and controlled the other three berserk beastmen. The little beastman girl on the top of the truck finally stopped. Her footsteps were a little shaky as she staggered back half a step. When the singing stopped, the orcs immediately reacted. They seemed to be a little more awake, and there was a slight struggle. Their rationality seemed to be wandering on the edge of madness. Seeing this, the other elite knights hurriedly came up and directly injected the orcs with sedatives. Only then did they really calm down. The elite knights were greatly relieved, and then came in front of Klein and Nick, and asked in amazement, "Klein, Nick, you are really good. Who is this singer? Does our organization have such a person?" They looked curiously at the top of the container. There was a young girl wearing a revealing outfit and a silver mask. Someone whistled softly. "They're some friends I met on the road," Klein said quickly. Thus, Clay quickly said, "This singing lady is a wandering freelance magician. She's good at the magic of the sound system. They volunteered to help us suppress the riot this time." He didn't directly say the identity of the orc girl. This made the orc girl on the top of the container look at Klein's back with gratitude. "I see." The knights didn't have much doubt. Freelance magicians did exist. They wandered around the world, and some caused trouble, and some were chivalrous. The knights had obviously heard and even seen it. Perhaps it wasn't just here. At this time, somewhere in the Fog City, there might be similar people with supernatural powers drawing their swords to help. Sound-based magic, hypnosis. The elite knights seemed to be inspired. "Klein, this idea is really good. I need to report back immediately. Maybe our organization can find a similar method. What do you plan to do with them?" Klein looked at the controlled orcs and asked with a frown. The elite knight quickly said, "We will first send them back to the organization. Now, many orcs have been controlled and sent back. These guys are too dangerous. If we can't stop them from going berserk, we won't be able to release them. It seems that this is the only way." Klein nodded and quickly said, "Guys, there's no time to lose. I'll leave the matter of escorting them to you. Since this method is really effective, we'll continue to go to other places to help. Thank you, the knights said in unison. The lift began to descend, and the little orc girl disappeared from everyone's sight once again. Klein quickly returned to the container after greeting everyone. As for Nick, he hurried to the front of the car. Looking at Boss Luo, who was about to get into the driver's seat with his hand on the door handle, Nick braced himself and said, "Sir, why don't you take a rest? I think you're tired. Let me drive." Boss Luo blinked. Not tired. In the end, Nick successfully seized the throne of the driver's seat. He then spent quite a bit of effort to straighten the body of the truck and drive to the next battle point. A few elite knights stayed behind, looking for tools that could transport these orcs. They were in a dilemma. Not long after, a transport vehicle slowly drove over, and at this moment, the transport vehicle stopped directly in front of them. A man opened the door and walked down. When the elite knights saw who it was, they immediately straightened their bodies. "Mr. Simpton." The man. Simpton looked at the controlled orcs behind them and nodded. "Looks like you have worked very hard. Thank you for your hard work. Knights, you are worthy of my respect." They were very proud. After all, the one who praised them was a Grand Knight, a very famous one among the Grand Knights. "Mr. Simpton, what are you doing?" "I took care of a group of orcs," Simpton said indifferently. "I was just about to send them back when I heard some commotion, so I came over to take a look. I didn't expect you to end the battle so quickly." Speaking of which, the knights smiled bitterly. "It's not our work." Simpton frowned. The knights quickly reported what had happened not long ago to this superior Grand Knight. Hearing this, Simpton frowned. "Freelance magician, Klein? Hypnosis?" "Yes, that's a good idea. If we can make them calm down, the damage will be reduced to the minimum." The knights nodded. "We saw it with our own eyes. They were handcuffed and injected with sedatives without any effort. I wonder if there are magicians who can use similar techniques in the mechanism." "Mr. Simpton." "Mr. Simpton? Oh, I was thinking about the feasibility of this method. I was distracted. Don't mind me," Simpton said calmly. The knights smiled. "When we saw it, we also felt it was unbelievable and distracted." Simpton nodded and said seriously, "Leave these orcs to me. There are still some seats in the carriage. The situation is still very dangerous. I suggest you go to other places to support our companions." "That's great. If Mr. Simpton is in charge of escorting them, there will be no problem." The knights were overjoyed. "Go, I'll take care of this." Simpton waved his hand. The knights saluted each other and prepared to move to the next battle. But just as they were about to move, Simpton stopped them. "Wait a moment, knights." Simpton took out some new standard weapons from the carriage and threw them to the elite knights. He said casually, "Knights, remember to always be in the best condition. Your equipment is damaged. Take these." "Really, thank you so much." "Go, knights." Everyone saluted again, put on their new equipment, and left gratefully. Simpton looked at the group of young knights until they disappeared at the end of the street. Only then did he look at the orcs that were under his control. Simpton looked at the orcs who still had their eyes half open under the effect of the sedative. He lifted the chin of one of the orcs with his sword sheath. After staring coldly for a few seconds, he raised the sword sheath and swept it across the orc's face. There were no words. Simpton unsheathed the magic sword from its scabbard and stabbed it into the beastman's heart. "Stop." In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, the moment the sword had penetrated a few inches, an extremely fast figure directly swept in front of Simpton. The moment the sword light was released, the demon sword in Simpton's hand was directly sent flying. Simpton was shocked. He instinctively jumped back a few meters to where the magic sword fell. At the same time, he saw the person who sent the magic sword flying. Knight Gareth. Simpton's eyes turned cold. He picked up the magic sword on the ground. The person who appeared here was Mr. Gareth. He frowned and looked at Simpton. His eyes flashed with uncertainty. He said in a deep voice, "Simpton, do you know what you are doing?" Simpton spread out his hands and said, "What am I doing? As you can see, I am escorting these orcs." "Mr. Gareth, are you misunderstanding something? I am just checking if the restraints on them are strong enough." Misunderstanding? Checking? Gareth took a deep breath and raised his sword. The sword slashed out an arc of light. The arc of light flew to the transport vehicle and directly cut open its compartment. When the steel plate of the carriage fell to the ground, the orcs inside were already lying on the ground. The smell of blood rushed to their faces. They had already become cold corpses. Is this what you call checking? Gareth gritted his teeth. The fire of anger seemed to be about to shoot out from his eyes. Simpton, you are abusing lynching. These orcs, they're also our residents. If I did not follow you because I was a little suspicious, how many more would you use this method to kill? How many? Simpton sneered. No matter how many they kill, it is not a lot. If I can make the world quiet down and kill all of them, it is fine. They were just bewitched. They have been living here peacefully. There has never been any problems. Simpton, you are too much. If there is a first time, there will be a second time. The dirty blood flowing in their bodies will not change. Simpton casually waved the sword in his hand. You can forgive and even let them go this time. What about the next time? They will continue to riot and be forgiven. What about us? Do we have to clean up these beasts again and again? Knight Gareth, if you are the sword of justice and do not want to touch these things, then please allow me to do it for you. Even if there is to be a punishment, it should be the final judgment of the Knight organization. No matter what, you are abusing lynching. Gareth took a deep breath. Simpton, you have completely deviated from your knight's spirit. You cannot continue like this. They need knights like you. Simpton shook his head. His eyes were firm. But at the same time, they need people like me. Now, as one of the 12 knights of the Round Table, I officially remove you from your position as a knight. Simpton, your crime will be judged later. Now, give up your weapon and surrender. Mr. Gareth said seriously, I hope that you can draw your weapon against your own comrades. 12 knights. Simpton smiled. The great legacy of knights. Gareth, do you really think that you can win against me? Gareth did not say much. After he decided to attack, he immediately activated the holy armor and rushed towards Simpton at his fastest speed. He raised his sword, but he used the hilt. At this moment, the hilt hit Simpton's abdomen at an extremely fast speed. But what surprised Gareth was that such a heavy blow did not cause Simpton to lose his ability to move. It was as if there was something blocking his abdomen. It was a piece of black armor. You are still too kind. The magic sword slashed down and forced Gareth to retreat in an instant. The numbness that came from the area between his thumb and index finger made Gareth secretly shocked. Suddenly, scarlet-red magic energy surrounded Simpton's body. On his body, there was a set of black shining armor. It was completely different from the holy armor. It was a terrifying black armor that looked like a ferocious beast. This is magic sword. Hegemony. Simpton slowly walked closer. The scarlet light of the magic sword in his hand became stronger and stronger. Mr. Gareth, it seems that you have not walked too far on the path of a Knight of the Round Table. This is the legacy power that you are so proud of? As he spoke, Simpton, who was wearing the magic armor, suddenly disappeared. It was not a high-speed movement, but a true disappearance, or perhaps it was transparent. Gareth's gaze was cold as he sharply observed his surroundings. He tried his best to listen to any sound. Suddenly, he felt a chill on his back. Knight Gareth used his fastest speed to turn around and block the attack. But the moment the sword in his hand blocked the attack that appeared out of nowhere behind him, Simpton disappeared again. To the side, Gareth's reaction was not slow, even if it was this strange ability to disappear. His long sword pierced out, and the black-armored figure that flashed to the side was instantly pierced by his sword. Moreover, the second figure that appeared was only a shadow. In a hurry, Gareth felt the third attack from the opponent behind him. He immediately turned his leg and stabbed out with his long sword at the fastest speed possible. In an instant, there were more than 30 stabs. The sword light bloomed like fireworks. This time, the physical attack came from the hilt of the sword. Dozens of holes appeared on the black armor of the black-armored figure in front of him. But at this moment, a sword blade directly pierced through Mr. Gareth's back. Who told you that this is a shadow? Shadow, in reality, change, Gareth felt a suffocating feeling. His lung was directly pierced through by the magic sword. Simpton chose to pull out the magic sword. This caused Gareth's pain to reach its peak. He was kicked away by Simpton. His body rolled on the ground like a ball. Faintly, he could only see the three black-armored figures gradually overlapping. Gareth endured the pain and used his sword to prop up his body. He felt that every time he breathed, his internal organs were being pricked by countless needles. The pain almost stripped away his senses. What a perfect stab. If I faced it head-on, I would probably fall down in one hit, right? Simpton walked over with his sword. It's a pity that you don't understand my ability very well. Cough! Gareth coughed out a large mouthful of blood. He could only feel his vision gradually becoming dim and pale. At this moment, Simpton once again raised the magic sword in his hand. Just as he was about to slash down, he quickly retreated like a bolt of lightning. Like a bolt of black lightning, he directly retreated more than 10 meters away. At the same time, he held his sword horizontally in front of him to block. An overwhelming and terrifying killing intent locked onto him in an instant. This caused Simpton's entire body to instinctively retreat. Since when did the 12 knights of the Round Table need to harm the enemy in front of them? A voice came from behind. At this moment, Gareth also felt a thick and substantial killing intent coming from behind him. He encouraged himself to look back. In the middle of a long street, a thin man wearing a white suit was slowly walking over step by step. That terrifying and dense killing intent was emitted from this man's body. It was as if it was visible to the naked eye. A terrifying aura was constantly emitted from this man's body. It's you. Gareth was heavily injured. He already felt a great headache. At this moment, when he saw this person's appearance, his scalp went numb. Farrell, the man in the white suit, slowly walked to Gareth's side. He lowered his head and coldly snorted. Your backhand is weak, your forehand is not good, your footsteps are loose, and your reaction is slow. Not a single movement is decent. Which trash taught you this kind of swordsmanship? Gareth was stunned, speechless. The current situation did not allow him to speak. Look carefully. This is how a sword should be used, Brad. Farrell stretched out his hand and grabbed Gareth's sword out of thin air. He held it in his hand and casually swung it. There was no sword light. There was only a gust of wind caused by the extremely fast swing of the sword. On the road ahead, Simpton, who was already secretly on guard, only felt a light breeze pass by his body. He did not feel any pain. Simpton couldn't help but frown. However, when he moved his wrist slightly, his expression suddenly changed. The demonic armor he was wearing was shattered in an instant. At the same time, dozens of crisscrossing wounds appeared on his body. Blood spurted out directly. The pain that followed almost drowned Grand Knight Simpton's consciousness. He directly knelt on the ground. Swing the sword 100,000 times every day with 10 times the weight. Go back and practice properly. Farrell snorted coldly and directly threw the sword to the ground. It stabbed into the ground in front of Gareth. Gareth's throat could not help but gulp. Hashtag PS 9/30. Chapter 13:11. Farrell. Didn't he leave the prison on the island? Why did he suddenly appear here? Gareth, who had already seen the power of the most powerful knight 100 years ago, quickly recovered from his shock. At the same time, a big question mark appeared in his mind. The stab wound was still very painful, but as a body that had been tempered beyond the limits of the human body, he still controlled his muscles well and forcibly closed the wound. As for his internal organs, there was nothing he could do for the time being. He could only endure. He held the hilt of the sword with both hands and propped himself up. Then he endured the pain that made his mind blank and forcibly pulled out the sword from the ground. Last night, thank you for taking care of me, Mr. Farrell. The tip of the sword was raised and aimed at Farrell, but at the same time, it was wavering. Gareth's face was full of solemnity. Although your swordsmanship is nothing much, Farrell said indifferently, your fighting spirit is not bad. This may be an evaluation that makes me feel happy. Gareth showed a smile that was not ugly. He secretly calculated in his heart how long he could resist the opponent in the current situation. 1 second, 2 seconds, or 3 seconds. But what surprised Gareth was that Farrell did not attack him. Instead, he walked in front of the fallen Simpson. The moment he walked past Gareth, this young and promising knight secretly let out a sigh of relief. Yes, it was a sigh of relief. Gareth suddenly shivered and turned around. He saw that Farrell had already walked in front of Simpson and bent down to pick up the magic sword on the ground. Something surprising happened again. When Farrell grabbed the hilt of the magic sword and was about to lift it up, the magic sword turned into a pile of gray sand. Before it could be picked up, it had already scattered. Farrell did not frown. He just casually glanced at Simpson's body. The same situation. This body covered in blood turned into a pile of sand in an instant. This is not real. Gareth was suddenly shocked, and then began to nervously pay attention to the movements around him. If he let Simpson stab him in the back again, he might not be able to stand up again. He's gone. Farrell looked over and said indifferently, "I let him go." "What?" Gareth looked at him in disbelief. He suddenly remembered Farrell's deeds. He was a madman, a real madman. He was not like the clown Dagonite, who did things that were more or less out of line, but did not cross the line. However, Farrell was a madman who had slaughtered the 12 round tables and was already a large number of elites in the organization. "Because I'm very curious," Farrell suddenly said, "I once seized this magic sword, but it was sealed in the end. Even the 12 knights would not be allowed to use it, let alone a mere grand knight." Gareth frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know for now." Farrell shook his head and looked into the distance thoughtfully. "No, we should know soon." After saying that, he simply left in front of Mr. Gareth. Mr. Gareth had wanted to stop him, but in the end, not to mention taking a step forward, he could not even lift his sword again. His opponent was a monster that made people lose their confidence in battle. He heaved a heavy sigh. "Wait for me, you old man." At this moment, a crisp female voice sounded. Amidst his astonishment, he saw the spirit, which in a purple dress, rushing over in a hurry. Hey, the knight only uttered one word, because when the soul which passed by him, she said hello, then lifted her dress and ran away. Gareth slumped to the ground. 2 felons left in front of his eyes, just like that. "I've reached my limit." Gareth lay on the ground. While his consciousness was blurred, he vaguely seemed to see someone close to him. It seemed to be a group of guys in cloaks and a glowing bird. The big truck was moving steadily, but Mr. Nick still paid close attention to the person sitting in the passenger seat, as if he was afraid that he would suddenly ask, "Why don't you let me take over your shift? I think you were tired." At this time, the mysterious young magician only looked at the rearview mirror on the left side of the truck. "Is there anything behind?" The black man could not help but ask curiously. Luaccio just smiled and said, "Nothing. It seems to be over." "Over?" Nick frowned and subconsciously looked at the rearview mirror on the right side. But in the street behind, except for the destruction everywhere, there was no one at all. It seemed that the guidance work was done quite well. He always felt that the origin of this young magician was too strange. Even Miss Orc was strange. "By the way, your companion. Where is Her Excellency Pansy?" Nick seemed to ask casually. "Her?" Boss Luo said casually. "Seems to have gone to see her student." "Student?" Nick was startled, but he reacted, "Oh, is that lady's student in danger?" Perhaps it was because he was in danger during the riot. Thus, as a teacher, it was normal for him to step in and save him. A little troublesome. Luaccio smiled, but we specialize in solving problems for people. At this time, the truck suddenly stepped on the brakes. It was not because of the answer, but because at this time, in front of the truck, someone made a stop action. It was a knight in the mechanism. In front of them, there was a team of about 10 knights, and among the knights, there was a young man wearing a doctor's robe. Bedivere. Nick called out the doctor's name in surprise. "This is Knight Bedivere, one of the 12 knights of the Round Table mechanism. He is not only a knight, but also a superb surgeon." The young doctor, Bedivere, at this time, put his hands in the pockets of his white robe and looked at Nick and Luaccio through the windshield of the truck. The sudden breaking caused Klein, who was behind the cabinet, to quickly come out. The two trainee knights and the support personnel who had been fighting in the wilderness halfway had finally met up with the main force here. "You're Klein? I have heard of your name. You are Garrett's student, one of the candidates for the next inheritance." The doctor calmly looked at Klein and nodded. He had no impression of Nick. Originally, he was not part of the round table mechanism of the Knights of the Fog. "Mr. Bedivere, why are you here? It seems that there is no battle here." Thus, Clay looked around. There were no traces of a recent battle, and Bedivere and the others didn't have any controlled orcs by their side. Bedivere explained, "I was originally responsible for evacuating the crowd, but the place I was responsible for has been evacuated. This time, I deliberately waited for you here." "Waiting for us?" Klein and Nick opened their mouths in surprise. Bedivere nodded. "Someone has reported that you successfully hypnotized the Berserk orcs with this sound technique. The two cabinet elders of the Birmingham Knight mechanism and the Edinburgh Knight mechanism, who were in charge of the suppression operation, gave me an order to assist you." "So that's how it is?" Klein nodded, but he was more curious. Why was the commander-in-chief of this operation not Sir Hopkins? Perhaps Sir Hopkins had more important things to do. Klein did not think too much. The appearance of Bedivere was naturally a great surprise for him. "So, is this the free magician who is proficient in sound?" Bedivere looked at the person in the front passenger seat again. When their eyes met, Luaccio just nodded to Mr. Bedivere and showed a friendly smile. "He is not," Nick quickly said at this time. "He and another secret magician who calls themselves Pansy are civil volunteers who joined us midway. The one who can sing is still in the container." "So," Bedivere nodded, but he could not help but feel a little puzzled about the name Pansy. It seemed that he had heard it somewhere, but he could not remember clearly at once. "Mr. Bedivere, we are now planning to go to the next suppression point. It's great to meet you. This way we will be more relaxed." Klein was really quite happy because of this. He had an unusually persistent longing for the Knights of the Round Table. This time he could fight side by side with them. As long as he thought about it in the future, he would be excited. "We won't go. We'll stay here." But Bedivere shook his head at this time. "You also stay here." "What?" Klein and Nick could not help but be startled. They only heard Bedivere say indifferently, "It's too inefficient for you to go one by one like this. I'm afraid we can't solve this matter by dawn. So, I brought some people here." With that, a nanny van that was originally parked at the side suddenly lit up at this time. The door opened, and several people in plain clothes came out one by one. Not only one car, but also no less than 3 cars next to it. At this time, people also began to come out. There were 26 people in total. These people were all dressed differently, but Klein could vaguely sense a strong magic power from them. "These people are," Bedivere said directly, "some of them are the internal magician consultants of our Knights organization, and some are civilian magicians. Like the few you met, they also intend to help us." "Mr. Bedivere, you plan to—" Nick, who seemed to understand Bedivere's plan, asked in surprise at this time. Bedivere nodded. "That's right. I intend to use a compound sound expansion spell to combine with these magicians to ensure that the magic power is sufficient and the range is the highest. Of course, I will only sing once and cover the entire Fog City." "Then what are we waiting for?" Klein was excited because of this, as if he felt that his life had reached a climax in an instant, his eyes shining. At this time, Chung Iran and the orc siblings also came down from the container one after another in confusion. They seemed to have heard this plan. It seemed that they had heard something extraordinary. At this time, Bedivere calmly walked in front of Luo and said in a tentative tone, "Mr. Freelance Magician, if you don't know the sound type of spell, you should be able to do it if you just help inject magic, right?" From the beginning to the end, Dr. Bedivere didn't feel the existence of magic from the other party. That being said, it wasn't that he didn't have any hidden means. After all, a free magician who walked the world always had all kinds of strange abilities. There should be no problem, right? Luaccio thought for a while. "Well, magic, what is that?" At this time, led by several magician consultants of the Knights organization, a group of civilian eccentrics directly began to draw a huge compound sound expansion spell on the road. The few ordinary people on the scene couldn't help but click their tongues in wonder, and even took out their mobile phones, intending to take pictures of this scene. Unexpectedly, their phones were directly confiscated by the knights. Will and the others could only stay on the side for the time being. As for Bedivere, at this time, from time to time, he looked at this sound-type magician Miss Lael and her brother wrapped in a tablecloth. No one knew what he was thinking. The magicians, on the other hand, were having a heated discussion. We should add a resonance-type expansion unit here. Through resonance, it can make the sound spread faster, wider, and save more magic. Do you want to add an effect enhancement? If it's a hypnotic spell, I think there should be space here to add a power enhancement. It's too cumbersome. There are too many equations to calculate. We are now racing against time, not researching a new topic. As the saying goes, too many hands make mess. This was probably the case, right? Of course, this was the home field of the magicians who had dabbled in the sound type of spell. As for the scene, there were still many people who had no clue about this, and only acted as the source of magic after the spell was completed. A woman with a hot figure, wearing a silk scarf and heavy makeup, at this time, walked catwalk and suddenly came in front of Boss Luo. He was here thinking whether he could use the method of thinking to replace the action of buying. What young magician! The woman's eyes were like silk. Little brother has a good figure. Are you nervous? It's your first time encountering this kind of thing. It's okay to be afraid. I will take good care of you. Maria, are you going to eat young men here again? Not far away, an old man who seemed to have a brandy nose mocked at this time. Ma am. Ms. Maria smiled slightly and looked at the old man with squinted eyes. Next time you come to my magic house to buy materials, I will give you an 18% discount. The old man seemed to be defeated and snorted coldly. Ms. Maria flicked her long wavy hair, then lowered her voice and whispered to our boss Luo, I'm not even 30 years old this year. Why are you looking for me? Luocio looked at her and suddenly said. Ms. Maria was stunned, and the smile on her face seemed to be restrained. Even the air of a prostitute seemed to have disappeared a little. She moved closer, and her rather spectacular breasts were almost touching. Pansy, is she your companion? This was her question. Hashtag, 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 hashtag PS. The next chapter will be later. Chapter 1312. Is she looking for you, Yi? She should have heard the conversation between Klein and Bedivere. Luocio asked curiously, Why are you looking for her? Ms. Maria took out a card with a smile. The card was drawn from the cleavage on her collar and gave it to Roland. She said, This is my business card. I'm a witch who runs a magic house. I'm running a small business, and I don't cheat anyone. Luocio took the business card and looked at it. He thought about Yu Ye's secret pharmacist license and asked, Are you going to ask her to make the secret medicine? Ms. Maria smiled and said, If I can ask her to make the secret medicine for me, that would be the best. However, I just want to buy a batch of secret medicine from her. I've never dared to think about making it because the cost of asking Pansy to make it is too high. I'm just running a small business. Is there anything special about the secret medicine made by Pansy? Luocio blinked. You don't know? Maria's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe it. Then she frowned and said suspiciously, Are you really a companion of Pansy like that young knight said? Luocio just nodded with a smile. He doesn't seem to be lying. This kind of gentle boy next door's healing smile is a bit unbearable. Maria exhaled deeply and then pondered for a while before saying, Has she never told you about her? I didn't know about Pansy until today. Boss Luo told the truth. He could ask Miss Maid to reveal everything at once, but he was more inclined to unearth it bit by bit, just like unearthing the most beautiful gem in the world. He peeled off all kinds of soil layer by layer and approached it little by little. It's strange, Ms. Maria murmured and then shook her head. But it's said that the woman's personality is quite strange. Forget it. I'll give you some information, little brother. Pansy is one of the 3 highest-level secret pharmacists in the world. The other 2 are honorary vice presidents of the Magician Association. Ordinary people can't invite them at all. It's even hard to see them. Only Pansy didn't join the secret spell tower of the Magician Association. She's a secret pharmacist who is willing to make secret medicine for outsiders. Do you know that a bottle of her secret potion was sold for 300,000 secret crystals at an auction held by the Magician Association? Well, Boss Luo didn't have any idea about this price. Then he showed expressions such as, that's amazing. It's so expensive. Maria's fanaticism didn't stop. Basically, the secret medicine of the pansy that is still circulating now is a super high-grade collection that is priceless in the market. Especially those rich secret pharmacists. They won't hesitate to buy a bottle even if they lose their family fortune. It's a pity that Pansy's works haven't been sold for almost 30 years. If her works appear in an auction in the magic world, not to mention 300,000 secret crystals, even if it's sold for 500,000 secret crystals, it might be sold for 300,000 secret crystals. The prices are so high now. Boss Luo couldn't help but sigh. Exactly. Ms. Maria bit her handkerchief and said, "Do you know that my magic house is running out of money recently, and the owner of the house is inhumanely increasing my rent? Also, because of the idiotic British government's stupid bill of breaking away from the League of Alliances, the cost of purchasing goods has increased by several times recently. Some of the best-selling goods can't even be bought. My life is getting worse day by day, and I have to live frugally every day. Look, I haven't bought new magic underwear for almost half a year. Little brother, look, this is the model from a year ago." Ms. Maria slightly lowered her collar and bent down, looking very pitiful. "If you know the pansy, can you introduce me to you? I'll give you a special service." "Okay." Luocchio smiled. "But you can't be too rough." "What?" "Okay." Maria froze on the spot. Did he agree so easily? There's more to come? Yes. Luocchio nodded. She went to do something, but she should be back later. I'll explain to you then. Then the service? It's no big deal. Luocchio said casually. It's just a small matter. However, you have to discuss the request with her yourself. Okay? Oh, what a healing smile. Maria rubbed her nose. Are all young magicians nowadays taking the path of healing? That's against the rules. At this moment, a magician consultant of the night mechanism suddenly shouted, "It's done. Come here and prepare to inject magic power, everyone." The magicians began to take their positions and stood in the middle of the road, around the huge circle array. Maria didn't say anything more at this time. Originally, she didn't want to listen to the night mechanism, but that guy, Bedivere, was willing to represent the local night mechanism and order a large number of items from her. Therefore, the lady of the magic house, who claimed to be running a small business, directly bowed her head and served tea to the evil capitalist boss who had stayed in the Western world for countless years. Then, she happily got on the car and came here. "Little brother, take this." At this time, Maria gave Luocchio a strange, irregular crystal that looked like a cobblestone. She lowered her voice and said, "You can keep this secret crystal. If you don't have enough magical power, you can draw from it. You're a boy. Don't lose face in front of adults. I'll buy it. It's not good to give it away." Luocchio thought for a moment. "Isn't your business in trouble? What a sensible child." Oh, Maria patted her chest and said, Don't worry. If you're really embarrassed, just take it as an advance payment for your referral fee. But after using it this time, you have to return to me, okay? Also, remember to be careful when you use it. This crystal's purity is very high. You only need to draw a little bit each time. Otherwise, the magic power will flow backward and burn yourself. Okay, Luocchio nodded. Thank you, Ms. Maria. Call me sister. Let's go and help inject magic power. Luocchio ignored her. At this time, the modified truck slowly drove into the circle array in the middle of the road. When it stopped, the big container behind the front of the truck and the deck began to slowly descend. When the deck was completely lowered, the whole truck directly turned into a huge stage. The sound equipment stacked in the four corners and the spotlights at the edge were all turned on at this time. The little orc girl stood alone in the center of the stage, slightly restrained. She was still tightly wrapped in the tablecloth, and at this time, she suddenly had an ominous feeling. However, she still took a deep breath and untied the tablecloth. Where did you find this truck and this little lady? Even Dr. Bedivere could not help but open his mouth in surprise at this time. When Klein and Nick heard this, they wiped their sweat awkwardly. Who knew where the young freelance magician came from? Let's start. Bedivere did not care too much about this kind of thing and gave the order on the spot. At this time, the magicians who had already stood around the circle array stretched out their hands and began to inject magic power into the compound spell. Luaccio, who was holding the so-called secret crystal sent by Ms. Maria, was thinking about how much he would take each time. Only a little bit. Little brother, is there a problem? Ms. Maria, who was afraid that as long as she turned her head, this little brother of hers would disappear, naturally stood to the side from the beginning. Oh no. Luaccio shook his head and then tried to activate the magic power in this secret crystal. Since there was a ready-made source of magic power, naturally, he could save the expense of buying it. If it was only activated, it should be very easy. It was indeed very easy. With a thought in mind, it was done. So, in Boss Luo's thought, the magic power contained in this secret crystal was completely activated in an instant. In an instant, a huge light of magic power soared into the sky, and the secret crystal in Boss Luo's hand directly turned into powder at this moment. The huge light of magic power instantly covered the light of magic power gathered by all the magicians, and then in the next moment, it was directly injected into the compound spell on the road. Are you kidding? This is the highest purity secret crystal in an instant. Ms. Maria, who was closest to the crime scene, at this time, her skirt was blown up by the airflow caused by the activated light of magic power at this time. Did I find a treasure? At this time, Ms. Maria didn't care about her skirt being flirted with by the rising airflow. At this time, she looked at the young healer with shining eyes, no longer thinking about the secret crystal turning into powder. Instead, she licked her lips excitedly. Such a powerful guy. The fact that he knows the pansy is definitely true. But just as this magic house lady's imagination was running wild, a loud and clear scream resounded through the sky, instantly shattering the glass of the entire long street. This loud sound even forced people to painfully cover their ears. It felt as if their eardrums were going to burst at any time. At this time, everyone looked up at this time, dumbfounded. In the sky, they saw a huge figure tens of meters tall, standing in the center of the fog city, not knowing what to do. The surrounding buildings were as small as toys to her. And this huge figure was impressively the projection of the orc girl, Lael, who was standing in the center of the stage. Oh, the effect is better than I imagined. Is it because of the extremely powerful magic power that was injected just now? An old magician murmured at this time. It turned out that this composite magic array not only had the effect of transmitting sound, but also had the auxiliary function of magnifying and projecting light and shadow. I don't want to sing. Seeing her huge projection appear in the fog city, the orc girl squatted down in grievance and cried with extreme grievance. This level of shame had already caused her mind to go blank. Don't look. It seemed that he had gone too far, and Luaccio blinked his eyes. Before the others woke up, he directly lowered his presence to the lowest level, probably to the extent that they would only feel that the person beside them was an insignificant stone instead of a living person. Sir Perkins' manor. In Sir Perkins' private office, the Prime Minister retreated step by step, and in the end he even fell to the ground with a feeling of powerlessness and fear rising spontaneously. He was drenched in cold sweat, and his body trembled as he looked at the man who walked in. Oberon. This was the leader of the inhuman armed thug group that he privately funded. He never left anyone alive and acted in a ruthless manner. In these early years, he had ordered this thug group to privately plunder the technology and materials of some powerful countries, so he knew the nature of the other party too well. But in just a moment, his doubts became clear. Oberon appeared in Sir Perkins' office, and Perkins had almost all of his information. You colluded with each other long ago. The Prime Minister looked at Sir Perkins in horror. This was more frightening than all of his failures at the moment. The uncomfortable feeling of being played in the palm of his hand from the beginning covered his whole body. Colluded? Sir Perkins shook his head at this time. In fact, I prefer to use the relationship of an alliance. Respected Prime Minister. Perkins, you old bastard. The Prime Minister finally couldn't bear all of the failures of this day, and he seemed to have lost his mind. Complete bastard. You said that I colluded with the Inhumans, and you, as a founding member of the Knight organization, actually colluded with the myth of Doomsday. The road to success is always accompanied by some. The old knight's eyes flickered, and he slowly said, some things that won't be recorded in history. Just like how you commanded the myth of Doomsday to launch the attack before the hijacking, and didn't hesitate to sacrifice ordinary people to let the Fianna onto the stage. What's the difference between us? The Prime Minister gritted his teeth and stood up in a sorry state like a loser. I don't understand. I really don't understand. Perkins, you already had everything. So why did you allow the Queen to be hijacked and this attack to happen? As a founding member of the Knight organization guarding Britain, why did you do this? For what? The old knight closed his eyes and muttered to himself. For what? To let the Holy Grail be opened, to have a legitimate reason to persuade the other founding members to be willing to bring the key to me. Holy Grail? The Prime Minister was suddenly shocked and subconsciously asked, what is the Holy Grail? But at this moment, a numbness all over his body, followed by a pain that overturned his nerves, spread from his chest. The Prime Minister looked at a palm that penetrated his chest in horror. That was the palm of Oberon behind him. You can think about this question after you and the Holy Grail become one. The knight looked at him indifferently and finally said goodbye. Farewell, old friend. I curse you. The Prime Minister, who had the power to overturn a country, finally lowered his head. Oberon. Caesar withdrew his palm and began to slowly wipe the blood on his hand, as if nothing had happened. It's finally coming to the end stage. At this time, the knight slowly stood up and then put on his coat. It seemed that he was planning to go out. Caesar, take me to see the Queen. Caesar looked at Sir Perkins expressionlessly and said indifferently, Perkins, you should call me uncle. Is there such a young uncle in such an old nephew? The old knight smiled slightly at this time and finally put on his hat. Let's go. I think our queen is a little anxious, probably. At this time. No, don't look. At this time, the scream resounded throughout the entire Fog City. Naturally, it also echoed over the manor of the Knight organization in Fog City. Huge. Lael. #######PS. 10/30ths.